Hey welders, ready to upgrade your gear and save some serious dough in the process? The Miller Build with Blue Savings and Rebate Program has you covered. Find amazing deals and cashback rebates on a wide range of Miller products, from welders to plasma cutters and everything in between, all backed by our 3-year warranty. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Take advantage of the Miller Build with Blue program now. Visit us online or stop by your nearest Miller distributor today to start saving.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Strange Motion Way podcast. I'm your host, Tim Strange, along with my co-host,
Carrie Strange.
Tonight, we have our first father and son guests on our podcasts from Pete and Jake's. Pete and Jake's was started by Pete Shaporis and Jim Jake Jacobs. I think 1973. I did a little research here. Jerry Slover bought it in late 86, and I believe that package even came with the famous California Kid coupe. They moved the company where they're from, Kansas City area, actually Peculiar, Missouri, the weirdest town ever, I think. But they're both serious hot rodders, keeping the name and the products going for 50 years now. Welcome tonight, Jerry and Jason Slover of Pete and Jake's. How are you guys doing?
Doing just fine. Doing great. Thank you for having us.
So I got my Pete and Jake's 50th anniversary shirt on here. I got some magazines here because I'm a magazine nerd. Before your dad bought the company, the California Kid coupe was,
there you go.
We've on the cover of Rod and Custom, November 73, and that's, I just noticed that tonight. It was before it said California Kid on the door. And then you guys also own the purple flamed 39 also, don't you? Or is it just in your show?
We do. Yes, we do.
And is Jake's coupe yours too now?
It is. It's sitting on the showroom floor. We got Jake's coupe about 2000.
Okay. I knew it was always on display and you guys had it at the Triple Crown and stuff.
Yep.
And then I was reading my Pete and Jake's book, and I realized as we were waiting to get set up, this book was written for the 25th anniversary. And
exactly.
50th. So yeah, a lot of great history. So we'll get started here. We'll talk to Jerry first, since he is your father. So how did you get into hot rods back in the day?
Oh, high school. Oh man, I drove a 32 3-window, chopped 3-window, full fendered car with an Oldsmobile in it and an Olds rear to high school. All my friends were driving 55 and 56 and 57 Chevys and Fords. They couldn't understand why I had to drive that old car. But I thought I was the one that was cool. I thought they were way behind.
Yeah. Well, about what year was this when you had the 32?
In 1964.
So it wasn't that old of a car then.
No,
really.
No, it wasn't. It full fendered car. It had an old Slim Jim transmission in it. That son of a gun would leak as much as you'd pour in it. So I got to where I could just run it low, and it seemed to do okay.
So with that 32, was that your very first car, or was that just your, like, you got a hot rod right from the start?
Yeah, I had a 51 Ford 2-door also. Yeah, that was my late model.
Yeah.
51 Ford. Yeah. Dad wouldn't let me park the 32 in the driveway. It leaked too much. You know, I had to park it in the yard. But no big deal.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was out there working on the brakes, and he says, "I thought you just fixed that." And I said, "Dad, I did, but it's leaking again." He said, "Well, why don't you just buy a new one of those cylinders?" I said, "Man, $4 as opposed to 10-cent cup." So you know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I just bought me a few cups, but it would stop.
So
anyways,
did you
it was an experience. Wasn't many hot rods in my school at all. None.
You were always where you're from now? Is that where you grew up and where you went to high school in that same kind of area?
That's correct. Yeah, I was born up north in Excelsior Springs, up north in 47. And we moved to Independence. That was Harry Truman's town.
I had an aunt that lived in Independence.
Yeah, we lived right down the street. I used to see him walk by all the time.
Huh. So, like, when you were in high school, did you like have a job? Were you a gas station attendant?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I worked at a service station, like we all did. You know, and most of the time we're working on our own cars.
Fixing the brakes.
Oh yeah, I got them fixed. Yeah.
Were you any car clubs or were you drag racing or allegedly?
Oh yeah, we
racing?
drag raced. We drag raced a lot. I used to race some of my school teachers. I had a coach that had a Corvair Monza. It had four one barrels. What was that called? Spider, I think, maybe.
Yeah. Yep.
So I went out and we had a quarter mile marked off outside of town, north of the Steel Bridge, and outrun him, and we got caught, and we both got tickets. And he came to me the next day and he said, "Hey," he said, "you think your dad could fix this up for us?" My dad was the chief of police. And I said, "I don't think so." So I did ask Dad, and he says, "Well, you going to pay for his too?" And I said, "Well," I said, "what's he going to do for you?" I said, "I think he'd give me a little better grade in geography." You know? So, but the bottom line was I outrun him. So that was a good thing.
So the real question is, did you pass his class?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no issues whatsoever. So I paid his ticket and we went on down the road. Everything went fine.
That's awesome.
So out of high school, what did you start doing once you graduated?
Well, I went to work for a manufacturer. They were building new creators and bondackers that used to pump concrete down in a hole or whatever. They were big. They were huge. And I would prep those for delivery.
Well, first thing was Vietnam.
No, I got drafted there when I was.
Oh, did you when you were working there?
When I was working at a company was called Clipper Manufacturer, and I got drafted there. So I went into service in it had been September of '66. I've been married about 4 months.
Where did you end up going in Vietnam?
Vietnam. Oh yeah, we all knew there at that age, at that time, it was always Vietnam, always.
Yeah,
So
I listened to a bunch of other podcasts, and there was one with he worked for Hot Rod and stuff. I'm blank on his name. I re-listened to his pod. Anyway, he went to Vietnam, and he was a Southern California drag race guy, and actually wrote some for Drag News. And then when he got there, his basic training, his guy that was in charge of him, not a military guy, so I apologize, the superior. It's like, any drag racers here? And then the guy's like, yeah. So because he knew that, and they were from the same drag strip, this guy got to work in the office and type, when they had to do like a presentation or an award, this guy did it. So he goes, man, I had the most slick, smooth Vietnam experience ever, because I met the right guy that was a drag racer, and I was too. So
there we go.
Any of that favoritism.
Well, we hit Cameron Bay and then went down south, and in a holding pattern down there, and you had to stand outside for about 2.5, 3 hours in the hot sun. I'd left in February, so it was tough. It was hard to do that. So and then when we got done standing there and they didn't call your name, you got to go burn waste. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I knew what you were going to say, and I looked at you and said, "Yeah, burn crap." We'll put it that way.
Yeah, you pour kerosene in it and light it, and we did that. And then I moved up to building fences, got that, and then I got they called my name, and I went to a place called Dragon Mountain, and I'm thinking, wow, what was that? That was the 4th Infantry Division. And so I was there for quite a while. Got into transportation. I hauled everything. Hauled everything from prisoners to workers to even hauled some rations. And I hauled a trailer load of beer once, but a lot of it didn't make it back. So it was Black Label though, and Crown. Crown was a Korean beer. Wasn't very good. Not very good at all. But what an experience. It sure was.
Carrie's dad and both of her uncle, three of them, two of them.
Three.
All three of them went. They were Vietnam also. So
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have any choice. We went. They called us, so we went.
Yep.
Yeah, my dad, he tried to go and tried to enlist, and they wouldn't take him because he was a farm kid on a dairy farm, and like the year before, he had got kicked in the knee and shattered his knee, even though he had knee surgery.
Okay.
They said he was a liability. He was bummed that he didn't get to go, but
Wasn't able to go.
I bet.
That's always been a lie.
So
my dad's still a liability.
Yeah, exactly.
So how many years were you gone overseas?
2 years. Oh, a year, 1 year, almost exactly a year. February of 67 through February 68. That was during TET of 1968. Oh my gosh. I was running, a lot of convoys, and I'd want to run them by myself. One time I hauled ammo up to Khartoum in the Khartoum province, and man, it was touchy. It sure was. And that was in January. That was right in the middle of that TET deal. And I made it, but had to stay a few extra days up there to get the heck out of there. But I got out. Just luckily, blessed
Good. Well, thank you for your service.
to be home.
Yeah. So when
Yeah,
you
you're
get
welcome.
home, what did you jump into when you got back in the States?
My 65 Pontiac 389 had a 389 full-size Catalina. I tried to get a GTO. I had one ordered, and my mom found out that the insurance was going to be more than my car payment. She says, nope. It was a 389, 360 horse tri-power, 4-speed GTO. So I bought a full-size Catalina 389 4-barrel, and it was a good running old car. It really was. 8 lug wheels and all that on it, So it was nice.
Yeah.
So that was one of the very first new cars I bought. And then I got moved to Texas for a while.
Was it Fort Hood?
Fort Hood.
Yeah.
They were serious about their drag racing in Texas. Every little town had a drag strip. So I don't know how it is today, but it was really like a vacation. I got down there, and they had moved the company across the fort. So they had me hauling, getting up at Reveille and all that at 6 o'clock. And I thought, man. So then I heard somebody say that, hey, we need some help in the mess hall. So I went over there, and I learned how to be the night baker for a few months. So that got me out of that. I used off like 3 days a week. That was pretty nice. So, but that's right when they had all the problems with everybody was rioting. So everybody was doing riot control down there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
He had white bands and no bands, and oh man, I thought they were going to shoot me back up here to Kansas City, but they didn't. I got out in about 2.5, 3 months later.
When did you end up with your El Camino?
I bought it new down there. I traded my Pontiac in for a 396 68 El Camino L 375 horse. It had a M22 and a 410 posse, and that son of a gun, it got me in some trouble. It didn't run very well. Very well. The 375 horse, had the aluminum intake with a Holly and dual point distributor. All that stuff was factory on a 375. But it was a good running car.
So were you taking that to the drag strip, or were you doing street racing?
Yeah, I had before. Yeah. And I traded that thing in for a 70 Challenger, 440 single 4-speed pistol grip shifter. And my El Camino would run the wheels off of that car. It wasn't broke in, but I got frustrated and I sold it. I didn't like it. It was my only Mopar I ever owned. 1970. Everybody's dying to have one of those now.
Yeah.
A Challenger.
Yeah.
It was a Challenger RT, 444 speed. Now, if I'd have broke it in, it may have run okay. I remember my wife and I went shopping over to the shopping center, and I'm walking into the Jones store, and I hear my El Camino. He's leaving the stoplight. I knew that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell. I told my wife, Peggy, I said, look at that. So I followed him back, and he was working for a lumber company. He said, well, if I decide to sell it, I'll give you a call. I said, okay. So anyways, that was part of that. Never heard from him. So anyways, that's about the story on the old car stuff.
So yeah, some of us allegedly might have trouble remembering our wives' birthdays, but we could hear one of our old cars
I know.
away. That's a true hot rodder right there.
When I bought my 34.5 window, that was in about 1976, maybe 75, 76.
It would have been earlier because
Would
I think it was probably, I think you told me I was about 74, I think.
Okay.
Didn't you buy it from the brothers?
Yeah, up north.
Yeah.
I bought it. It had a 283 in it already. And then, of course, in 1977, I blew it apart and acid dipped it and made a nice 5-window out of it. Very nice. Jag rear, that's what was hot back then.
I assume by now you have some.
Yeah, and a Super Bell 4-inch tube. It was 49 inches wide. And so you had to be very, very selective on your wheel and tire in front.
Yeah.
Oh, and I think that's when you met Pete.
Yeah,
So that would have been wouldn't that have been?
Yeah, one of their first 4 bars on the front.
Yeah.
Had a 4 bar in front.
Yeah.
Had the rubber bushings, those are control arm bushings, from General Motors. And they got to where they couldn't get them, and the availability was tough, and they couldn't control the price. So they came up with a urethane. They were the very first one to do a urethane bushing in hot rods. So that's how that all come about.
We were talking when P Wood came back for the open house. He and I were talking about the 4-bar, and up on Jake's coupe, of course, is still the original 4 bars that he did, and those were rear Panhard bars off of I think he told me a 60 or 70. No, what was it? Maybe mid-60s Chevy, big car, and he had 4 Panhard bars, and that's what's on the front of the on Jake's coupe right now.
Oh,
that's
wow.
the original 4-bar that Jake did, and it's still on his coupe.
He put the first Panhard bar on the front of that too.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what that was all about.
Yeah.
He had Barry Lobeck with him, and we all knew who that was, don't we? We know.
Yep.
Did we remember Barry?
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways, they were going to a rod run to meet Pete, and they were in Jake's coupe, and went over a railroad tracks, made a slight turn, and them shackles rolled off center. Jake says, "We got to fix this." So he ground the bottom of their yellow paint, and it's still that way, and put on a Panhard bracket and fixed it. So that was the very first, but that's the way you did things back then.
Yeah.
A quick change that's in Jake's coupe was originally in the California Kid, but they wanted to do some new products. Ladder bars come on board, a new cross member, and all of those type of things. So that came out, and Jake says, "I'd like to have that quick change." So they negotiated a deal and went right under Jake's coupe. Just kept it in the family.
Well, and Jake always told me that that the California Kid is the one that always got the changes.
Yeah.
Because that was the company car.
Yeah.
Jake's coupe never changed. In fact, it's still the same because it's his coupe. We went out to the Roadster show. Jake came by, got to spend quite a bit of time with him. It was nice. He came by the booth and hung out for a long time. And,
Probably about 5 hours or something.
yeah, he did. And so he come over and he was showing one of his friends that had never seen the car. Of course, he'd seen it in magazines and other things, but he'd never seen it in person. So they're walking around the car, and I asked Jake, I said, "You want to sit in your old coupe?" And he said, "Yeah." So we walked around the display. You saw it out there, walked around the display. And he got in there, and as soon as his butt hit that seat, man, the story started. And he's looking at up on the header panel, all of the dash plaques are still there. And that's just the way it was before. And he said, "The dash has changed. There was a dash plaque there." I said, "Jake, the dash plaque's right there. Don't worry, we didn't get rid of it." He just wanted to make sure we didn't change it too much. So so he got out, and I asked him a favor, and I know Jake, and I knew he didn't really want to do it, but he did it. He did it for me. I said, "Could I get you to sign the inside of the glove box for me?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "All your stuff's still in there." And he kind of looked at me funny, and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Look." He opens up the glove box, starts digging around in there, and he found his original spiral notebook pad, and it had mileage and other things in it. It had one of his maps in it, and he just smiled. He got the biggest smile that all of his stuff was still there.
That's awesome.
So yeah. So he signed the glove box for me. They went around to the back of the car, and he was telling them the story of the deck lid.
Louver.
Yep, louver in the deck lid. And if you look at that magazine you've got in your hand, if you peek back in there, there's going to be an article on louvering, and it's him and Gene Winfield, and there's a picture. It wouldn't have been part of the main article. I think, Tim, it's towards the back, and there's a small picture, maybe bottom right-hand corner, and it's got a picture of Jake with his beard and his hat, and he's Gene standing there next to him, and the deck lid's there. And he was telling us the story of,
there it is. Yep.
yeah, you see it? Okay. Yep, that's it. So he was telling the story about dimensions and other things with Eric, his friend that was with him. And I said, Jake, they're still there. And he looked up underneath there, and there's a piece of galvanized that's still there. And it's got his pencil dimensions on that piece of galvanized when he cut it.
It's
Oh,
all
wow.
still there.
Yeah. So then he started talking about how he riveted in there. So he gets in the trunk with a flashlight, and they lock the deck lid so he can drill holes. And he's putting that piece in because he wanted to do it when it was on the car, just to make sure everything stayed square to the car.
Yeah.
Because it was, without any inner structure, it was pretty wiggly. So it's still there. And when he opened up the trunk, he saw his toolbox. His toolbox consisted of a cardboard box that he had cut the side out of it and duct taped it to the inboard side because the trunk's unfinished. And we never changed a thing. It's all still
There's
the
no
same.
upholstery, no nothing. Jake's his theory was it would hold more stuff if you didn't have any side upholstery on it. That
It's
was
true.
all.
My wife has a custom Corvair, and she did the interior in it, and it went to SEMA like 11 years ago. And the trunk's not done. She goes, "Well, I'm not selling it, so who cares?" Yeah, yeah.
Well, that way you can go sheet metal to sheet metal with lawn chairs and coolers and everything else. So,
Yep.
But I was one of the very first dealers out there at Pete and Jake's. That was about 1976, I sold somewhere in there that I become a dealer.
When did
And
you
they were
have?
excited about that because I had an auto parts business, and they thought that would be just a good fit, So, and that's how we got started. That's how I'd been a dealer of theirs when I bought it for about 12 years.
Oh wow. Okay.
When did you have your kids? When did the kids come into the
Yeah, just one.
Yeah, just me.
1970.
Okay, so he's a year older than me, so I knew he was around there probably by now at this point. So
Oh yeah, he was.
yeah, I mean, I remember I remember the car being your 5-window being yellow. I remember the thing that intrigued me in the garage, Dad's toolbox had stickers on it. And of course, like guys' toolboxes today. And I remember one of them was the Edelbrock Spider. I think they did a spider intake. I think it was for the intake had a spider on it. And then the one, of course, I'm 6 years old, and the one that would just make me laugh was Transdapt, and it had the ape on it, faster than a striped-assed ape.
yeah,
And it had the stripes. I just thought that was the funniest thing ever because it had the word ass in it, and I thought, man, that's just funny as can be. It had that ape running. So yeah, those are just little things that I remember, but it wasn't yellow very long. He blew that thing apart. So
and then Pete started buying master cylinders from me because I could buy direct, and it was a single bolt. The early Mustang cylinder, 7/8 with a 39,626, a 1-inch was a 39,000, and then you had an 1.125" for a truck. But they were single reservoirs, and they still work very well today. I still got some on my shelf. Everybody turns their nose up at them, though, a single reservoir. But that's still what's on the original California Kid.
yeah.
Is that Mustang master cylinder.
Yeah, so they were buying, parts and pieces from Dad. But I remember being up at the shop and all the old Pete and Jake boxes and all the little labels, and that's just what I remember. About that same time would have been, of course, Super Bell, and of course Deuce Factory, Roy Fiesta, Ed Moss, TCI. Of course, and that's where all that started. Pete and Jake kind of did the 33, 34 stuff. Ed Moss was doing Model A frames. That's where he started, just Model A perimeters. And of course, Roy Fiesta, Deuce Factory, 32 stuff. Roy was a drag racer, wasn't he?
It was.
That's what I thought. I thought he was drag
is the
racer.
Juice Factory still around?
It is not.
No,
it is
it's
not.
been
Yeah,
gone for
it's
20-some
yeah,
years
it's been gone. Been gone
quite a
quite a
while.
while. It's been gone quite a while.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and was it Kathy?
Lisa was the last one, but Kathy worked it too.
Well, but Kathy was on the board with you at
Yeah, she was.
the
SRMA.
Yeah, the early board member SREA back then. It was before even SRMA.
Street Rod Equipment
Yeah.
Association.
Now it's the HRIA, but early on it was the SREA, and that Kathy was on Kathy Fiesta. That was Roy's daughter.
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't seen her in many, many years.
Yeah.
I don't know. She married a drag racer.
I think so.
When were you on that board? So
Oh, I was on her for about 12 years.
Yeah,
So gosh, it had to have been 90 something in that area.
no, that it was late 80s.
Oh, was it late
Yeah,
80s?
because remember that. See, Pete was on it. Boyd was on it.
Yeah, Boyd and Pete
Boyd,
and
Pete,
Jim Ewing.
Jim
from
Ewing,
Superbell.
Superbell, he was on it. Kathy was on it.
Yeah, and Frank Heddick from Classic Instruments.
Was Frank on there in the beginning?
He was.
I think so.
Started
Now,
pretty quick.
Did Spadero was he on at that point?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, Dick Spadero.
Dick Spadero from early Ford Reproductions.
Dick was on it.
and that's a list of legends right there, man. That's
And that was early. That had to have been. Gosh, I'm trying to remember because it was before the SRMA. Well, we were talking to Tim over at Hushmat.
Mhm.
Remember, he was doing some of the history on that,
Yeah,
and I think he found out when it was, and I think it was like 80.
80s.
Yeah, it was like 86.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or it would have been after we got Pete, after you got Pete and Jake's, because well, I think because Pete was working at SEMA, wasn't he, at that time? So
Yeah.
that had to have been 87.
Yeah,
Because that,
87.
because after he sold us Pete and Jake's,
Wearing a suit.
yeah, he ended up going to wearing a suit, went to SEMA and wearing a suit.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But it was interesting.
there then was the street rod and hot rod division of SEMA, and then
Exactly.
That's
Right.
it turned
But
into
a lot of-
something else. Now it's
A lot of
HRA.
ego at that table.
It was
Well,
something before HRA. It was street.
So it was so SREA would have been
Street Rod Equipment Association.
Street Rod Equipment Association, because SEMA, Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association.
Yeah.
So it was SREA, then it became SRMA, Street Rod Manufacturers Association,
Mhm.
right? And then from there, it became HRIA to include the restoration muscle car. That's when they tied that in.
Yeah, it was
But
almost
before
like-
that, it was the
started going to
SRMA.
something like 20 some years ago. It was something else. I don't remember.
Right, but there was a lot of ego at that table, man. It was almost a green fog above that. I just sit back and listen most of the time. But I found out early that if I was going to make, some kind of a role that I could do and participate in, I got a hold of legislation.
Yeah.
And I started traveling, under the SEMA umbrella. I met with some senators and congressmen, in motels. You thought we'd been doing drug deals, But and then I addressed all 50 states at that time. 50, yeah, it was 50. Well, we wanted to take Canada into 51, didn't we? But 50, just to try to tell them, what we were about. They still thought we were buying used motors, tearing up the street, smoking and carrying on and doing all that thing. I went on to tell them we're buying brand new crate motors, and but it was tough to get in there. But I did. We wrote the definition for a street rod, and it's being used today still. And I came back to Missouri, and I was fortunate to have a chief of police at Springfield, Missouri, and he had a Deuce Roadster with a big block in it. And he told me the story about coming up here from Texas. He said, "You know what? I couldn't register this car." I said, "I know. We need to fix this." So we did. He went to the colonel of the highway patrol, and we got in. We had to make some concessions, but we did it. It was a big step in. I mean, we got a hot rod to show. No, it didn't matter if it had fenders, it was chopped, any of that kind of thing. So it was good. We made some inroads there. And
I don't think a lot of
was,
people like my generation and the next generation, they don't understand that if it wasn't for your guys' generation getting involved, we probably wouldn't be able to be doing what we're doing now.
That's correct.
Yeah,
I remember
in Missouri.
when we lived in Illinois, the NSRA did that, got with the state of Illinois, so you could title a fiberglass body and not have to steal a VIN tag or something like that. It was a big deal. I mean, they went through all the stuff, and it's still 48 older. They didn't do all the paperwork, not thinking that, oh man, people's going to build 54 Chevys or 72 Camaros that come out of a junkyard. So they still have that place in Illinois, that NSRA and the whatever street.
But when I addressed those 50 DMV guys, I told them, I said, "Listen, we will pay your revenue because it's all revenue driven, Tim.
Yeah.
every bit of them. And I said, they said, well, what do you mean? I said, if you tell us it's going to be a $200 hit, to do that, that's a small price to pay to get it right. So, I mean, they bought off on louvers and it didn't matter. No mud flaps or anything like that, of course.
No bumpers. I mean,
Yeah,
they didn't, I mean,
that's
they
it,
didn't put
that's
any
it.
of that. So in Missouri, like you got there in Illinois, Tim, in Missouri, we had, at that time, it was Governor Ashcroft,
Mhm.
signed a bill, that you guys helped write
That's it.
called the hot rod law or street rod law.
I've got
And
it on my
it's
desk.
like you talked about, Tim, 48 and down, where you could do fiberglass body. So in Missouri, the way that they do it, it would be, let's say we're doing a 32 Ford, whether it be a Brookville or fiberglass, whatever the case may be, they refer to it as a 1932 Ford replica, is what they call it.
Yeah.
So
See, in
it's still
Illinois,
32 Ford.
It depends on how you check the box, because I know a couple guys. Allegedly, if you check the right box, you could get a real 32 title for a glass 32 and not be replica. But if you check one box, you'll get a replica title.
Right.
In Tennessee,
Well, one of the issues,
we don't have a problem with titling stuff in Tennessee yet. So
right. Right. Well, one of the issues that you've got, for example, in that scenario, I know for a fact, state of Kansas, the DMVs and the Highway Patrol are very, very educated. So I had a customer that had a 34 3-window glass car, nice car. He had bought it. This car had been titled in Missouri, gone to Arkansas, been titled again back in Missouri. He went to Kansas. He did everything right, rolls up on a trailer, has the car on a trailer, and goes into the Highway Patrol so they can check it. And patrolman opens the door, closes the door, hands him the title back with a red mark through it. He said, "This is a fiberglass car. This is not a 34 Ford. It cannot have a 34 Ford title because it's not a steel car." And left it at that. So it's pretty important, like we were talking, glass car, steel car, and that's where people get a little confused. We can get things done in certain states, but what's so frustrating is, for me, I mean, well, you've been here, Tim, the state line isn't more than,
35 minutes away.
Yeah, not even that far. I mean, it's just across, maybe 3-4 miles, but it's so different from Missouri than it is to Kansas. And we as car guys, that's what's frustrating. Just, make it consistent so we know what to do. And even today, with all the work they've done, NSRA, all the work everybody's done, there's still so much gray area that can create a problem. And those are things we work through. Of course, it's still, that's still a small percentage of it. Most people build their cars, get them titled, enjoy them, no issues.
Yeah, well, I spent quite a bit of time at the Highway Patrol. Highway Patrol wants to know that the serial number on that motor, engine number, that's about it. That's the major component. They want to make sure that it's not stolen, from a chop shop or something like that. And that's really about what they're checking, plus the revenue.
Yeah.
We got an SR 551 form that you're supposed to list all of your major components and what you paid for them. Now, if you got proof of paying sales tax, okay. If you don't, you need to pay sales tax. And that's all they check off.
Right.
Is those two things. And now you can go right on through there. No problem.
Yeah. And then back then, when you guys were working on all those laws, there was 30 fiberglass street rod body companies now, and there's not that many now. So that was a big deal back
Right.
then. We got
It was.
I mean, there was, Gibbons and all that stuff. And, some people we take for granted, like you're talking about the master cylinders, all that stuff, of what's available in the industry now is incredible. Even, I've been running my shop for 30 years on how it's grown in that. I was on an advisory board one time for a couple of years for Wildtech at the Pennsylvania location with Chuck Lombardo from California Street Rods, because he was originally from Pennsylvania. So they had him on there, and listening to his stories.
Very well. He was on our board there for a while too.
Yeah. And he says, me and my buddies were in one of the magazines, and whatever it was, Street Rod or Rod and Custom, in that magazine name, said we were the first ones to show a how-to article going to the junkyard and getting your Mustang 2 cross member and putting it in your street rod. And then now, I mean, there's still 40 companies building Mustang 2 cross members. And I think we take
I'm
for
sure.
granted that. And like, you know, in the street rod heydays of stuff, people were like, oh, I get tired of going to my car show and seeing a fiberglass 32 3 window. It's awesome. Turn around, there's a blue one, there's a red one. Well, to me, it's almost the same way again. Now you get your Camaros. You can buy a brand new Camaro body. You can buy a brand new Tri-5 body. I mean, they're steel, but they're not glass. But I mean, we're pretty lucky that we can just call up. We don't have to go to the junkyard. We can call Pete and Jake's, and you guys can build us a whole chassis for whatever we want. I mean, it's the industry.
Right.
Yeah. Jerry, did you ever think the industry would be as big and all encompassing as it is now, with all the stuff and availability and people just putting fuel injection stuff, everything?
Not at all. Not at all. No. And I thought, well, we're going to run out of steel cars. We haven't yet. They're still popping up once in a while, but most of it's glass, fiberglass business,
or repo steel.
Yeah, like Brookville's got the
Brookville,
3 window and the roasters, of course.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know where me and my buddies talk about this. You see a couple of them go through auctions every once in a while, and man, I can say there was all these companies pumping out glass bodies, and these cars have disappeared. I mean, you go to a good guy show, yeah, they're still getting big amounts, but you have the Camaros and fives and all that. So there's a lot of hidden fiberglass cars that they're just going to come out of the woodwork when the next generation.
Yeah, you're right.
Something. But,
I mean, you know, like you said, you were talking. You know, I remember there was Dick over at Polyform, of course, Westcott. You know, D and Carl Westcott, and there was
Gibbon fiberglass.
Yeah, Gibbon. We talked about Gibbon, but there was down in Texas, Harwood. Yeah, Harwood bodies.
Gary Harwood.
Yeah, they're Kilburn bodies.
He's over in Illinois.
Yeah, and
down
and then,
yeah,
well, and then from there, what you had guys doing, they were taking, and I think this is where, you know, your early guys, Gibbon and Westcott and those guys, they pulled molds off steel cars. Okay, so at that point, the body lines were still crisp because they pulled it off of a steel car. It's a one copy. Well, what happened is more and more guys started taking a Gibbon car, doing the body work on it, pulling a mold off of it. Well, now what you're doing is you've got a copy of a copy. You know what I'm saying? And then the body lines and things started to get more muted.
Have you ever seen that movie called Multiplicity?
Yeah.
That's the guy cloned himself and clones himself. Then the clone of a clone, the number he's not quite right in the head. And my wife and my good friend Zane Cullen from Katati Speed Shop, I figured out when they're talking about me when I'm not around, they call me number 3.
No, we call you number 2.
All right.
Yeah,
that's cool.
You're number 3.
Not quite right.
Not quite right. Yeah.
Doesn't quite right.
Yeah. I need a better class.
Another one that's come on is Show Me Rods down in South Missouri.
Well, and that's a good example when Tony and his wife Cindy, you know, they started it, sold the business, and bought it back. And I remember Tony calling and
he came up here.
Yeah, and he was asking, you know, what
do we need to do to make this company go forward?
And of course, the first thing you and I told him was
hit stock hinges, deck lid handles, cowl vents. He even does a crank out windshield, you know, for a glass body. So when that car is done, you've got no idea what it is,
that it's a glass car, because it has all the attributes of a steel car.
Yeah, you got to go over and peck on it a little bit, see what it is.
So there was a time you guys did, I don't know if we're getting out of the time zone, we always jump around a little bit, but didn't you guys did a Viper package? Was that a get with Gibbons? And
we did. Yeah, Gibbon fiberglass.
Yes, we did. So it was
car.
Yeah, it was what we wanted to do was take their standard body without having to do a tremendous amount of work. A guy could get the look of a, you know, well, when you take a 34, as you know, you pull the fenders off of a 34. For the most part, it looks like you pulled the fenders off of a 34. You do that to a 32, and a 32 could have come down the Henry Ford assembly line and never put a fender on it, and it looks exactly the way Henry would have designed it. A 34 with the inner fender panels and things like that, you can tell that a fender was supposed to be there. So a lot of guys will take it and, of course, channel it. You know, that was always the big to get rid of that inner fender panel or the bubble panel.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do was channel the body slightly, and then they built a rocker for it. Dwight designed a rocker to go up and over the frame, kind of a Z shape, to cleanly bring the line up and over the frame, because the frame always stuck out. Of course, you know, when Boyd did the Vern Loose coupe, it was all pinched so much the rail was gone. But on a normal 34, we were also trying to keep the frame stock, meaning a stock with 34, no pinch, nothing. And then you could set the body on it. So it was a package we tried to do where it had that custom nose down look of a 34, but still not have to do so much work to the frame. A guy could even use a stock frame. And we took the frame horns, a lot like what Jake did, cut the frame horns off in front of the cross member and put a hook style horn down on it. And that just kind of helps finish that front end off, because once again, on a 34, that's it. Yep. On a 34, you take the fenders off of it. Up there in front, the frame horns didn't have anything to finish them off. So
No spreader bar.
Yeah, there's no spreader bars. So
You
that's
see
what
that picture there in the book.
yeah, I got it. Yep, that's it.
That's you back there putting gas in that thing.
I know it. Yeah. Who's that thin guy with hair?
Yeah. I remember I seen them the first time in person. I don't know, probably Nats or something. I was like, man, I wanted one of them cars so bad. They were so sexy looking.
Yeah. Well, it had the right stance. You come up behind one of those cars sitting down in a car behind it, man, there's no other turned on look other than that, boy.
Well, and you look at that, you know, what we were trying to emulate, of course, the Super Bowl coupe, the Proofer's coupe, the Cop Shop coupe, you know, the one him and P Wood did, you know, that same look. And of course, you know, the guys that do the right photography, you know, they know how to shoot it. They shoot it from the back and just come in on it, and that big quick change and everything hanging out of the back.
So how many? Do you know, have an idea how many of those bodies were done for that package?
You know,
I would say more, maybe close to 50 or so.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
And then they switched gears. You remember when Dwight's son Kyle ended up with Gibbon Fiberglass, and he did the Viper 2, and that one was a little more radical, more of that, I guess, the Vern Loose, remember, because he pinched it down. And most of them were IFSs, and they were super, super low. We did that special X member where it had a drop floor in it.
Oh, yeah.
So people remember, because it was channeled more, and people had more headroom. So we did that single X member in it, and there was probably less of those. There was probably maybe Kyle would probably be able to tell us, but I bet there was maybe 20 of those. Yeah. You know, so I don't think there were a lot done.
And they're not building bodies anymore at all, are they?
They're not. The when Kyle ended up selling the molds and other things, and some of the molds, I don't know what ended up happening to them. You know, they
went all over the place.
They did. They kind of got split up and went different. Remember, they did that. Well, the like the Purple 39, you know, did the 39 convertible body.
That's a Gibbon body.
Remember the 37 Cabriolet? That was a really hot car.
They had a club cabriolet and a regular cabriolet.
Yep, they did the cabriolets, and I don't know where those molds where they ever went.
But the purple cars got steel fenders.
All the Rats glass bodies, they're trying to sell all those molds, because I had somebody that was thinking about getting them, and I'm like, man, I don't know, maybe buy one of the molds, but they're wanting to sell all of them to jump that deep into a fiberglass street rod body company.
Right.
This day, I don't.
Yep. Yeah, and of course that was, you know, he did, you know, that Speedstar that he did with Bobby.
Bobby Alloway.
Yeah, you know, he did that Speedstar, and that was and that was a radical, you know, once again a radical style car. But that's what the idea that, like I said earlier about the Viper, it was just trying to keep it, you know, try and get that look without having to completely change the frame, especially. And for us being frame guys, that's what we're always thinking about. Okay, you know. Yeah, sure, which we do. We pinch them and change them and stretch them, but you know, how can you just, you know, work off of a Henry Ford dimensionally and, you know, try and get that look? So
yeah.
One more thing on the fiberglass bodies before we start.
Yeah, that was George.
Chassis stuff. I remember Gibbons. One of the last years they went to the Street Rod Nationals, they seen the muscle car stuff coming, and they had like a Cuda, a Vet, like a wide body Vet, a Camaro, like a first gen Camaro, and a bunch of them in their booth. And then the next year it was all gone because Greenings ended up building the prototype for the Camaro for a customer out of Florida.
Right.
They seen that muscle car stuff really coming, but then then they kind of went away.
Well, I think, Tim, if I remember right, I think that was Downs. Here's
okay.
why.
Okay.
And the only reason I'm thinking that is because
I think
at the Nationals, the show you're talking about, we were the same place we always are at the Nationals, and they had, it was still the way that hall's set up. That was still the old section. So of course it was, the way the lighting was. If you remember, it was pretty bright where we were, and then right across the aisle, that was the old section. And like you're talking about, I remember we're setting up, and this is before the NSRA changed, to it was still a pre-49 show. And they start rolling these cars in, and you're right, it was a Cuda, it was the Corvette. They started rolling these things in. And I'm kind of looking around at everybody else, and they're looking, thinking, what the heck are they bringing those cars here for?
Yeah.
Because it's all just hot rods. And I remember the first day, and it was, and Downs had, they had sold. So this was the new owner that had taken it over. And that second day, so on Friday, they ended up bringing a hot rod into the booth. Because people are just kind of
know who it was.
Yeah, they didn't know who they were. So they went. One of their customers with a Downs body was outside, and they ended up bringing him in. And but I remember that. Yeah, I remember.
People don't understand how hard cutoff that was, the 48 and older thing.
Oh man!
Oh my
There's
God.
even stories
I mean,
about when they built Cadzilla, it wasn't a 48 Cadillac, it was a 49 Caddy. And they're like, where are you going to take it? Because the NSRA was, good guys was still kind of getting their feet going at that time, and not,
exactly.
now they're huge everywhere. They're like, where are they going to take this show? Because you can't take it to an NSRA show, but they had them on display. But it was hard.
Yeah.
It made a lot of people mad when they opened up those shows.
Oh yeah. And Dad and I talked about that. I mean, when they made that change, it was a big deal. I mean, it was a really big deal. But you're right. I mean, it was, even local shows. You go to a local show, and it was a street rod show, hot rod street, and that was it. You didn't, everything was split. There was no Camaros, no Chevelles. I mean, it was a hard line, just like you said. I mean, you couldn't bring a Tri-5 Chevy in. I mean, that was just the way it was.
Yeah,
I think
there's still some good street rod shows. Evansville, Frog Follies is still 48 and older, I believe. I think.
Yep.
The Quincy.
And you got the Gathering at the Rock. Those are real traditional.
Yeah, Gathering at the Rock. That's
traditional hot rods.
Jason and his family down there, and Buzz, they do a nice show at the Gathering at the Rock. And but you're right, there's still some pre-48 and Shelby's Way over there. Mark does the what's that? Yeah, what's the show Mark does over there? He does Deuces
Bluegrass something Deuces.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and that's a great show too.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, there's still some pre-40, and of course you've got magazine wise, you've got Paul Martinez, still doing Rodding USA.
Yeah, he does a good job with that magazine.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, and it's he was. I remember when Paul came in, I think he shot the California Kid and Jake Scoop for one of the anniversaries, and he put him on the cover. But he comes in and he was telling me, he said, I don't know if I've ever told you the story of my first photo shoot. And I said, no. He said, well, I started working for Hot Rod. And he said, I go into the office and they give me an address. So he said, I get the address and I go, where Pete was in Arcadia, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets his address in Arcadia. So he rolls up and looking at the house, and there's a garage door, and it's it's a pass through, wasn't it?
Right. You couldn't get around the house.
The lot wasn't wide enough.
You had to drive through the garage.
The garage door on both sides. And he said, so I'm kind of nosing around and I'm looking. He said, I walked back, and he said, there's this red 33 3-window,
Mhm.
and the California Kid and Jake's Coupe. And he said, I look over and, guy with a beard, and that was Boyd, and Pete and Jake, they all had beards at that time. That was his first photo shoot. He's telling me the story. It's in that book. If you look in that history book, flip through it. As soon as he's telling me the story, I said, hang on a second. I go over and grab the book. I said, is this the picture? He says, yep, that was my first photo shoot.
Kind of cool. Yeah.
So
He's got them.
let's jump back a little bit. We kind of skimmed over it. How did it come about of you buying Pete and Jake's? I know Jason's told me the story before.
I was one of their oldest dealers, and so I heard a rumor that they might be for sale. And I think it was a 13-year partnership that had gotten a little bit mixed in the middle. Jake wanted to stay in the garage and work, and Pete wanted to be on the phone and all the covers of the magazine. So they were testing each other, and it was pretty tough. So I just went to them and I said, yeah, I heard you guys could be for sale. And they said, why don't you come out and make it a date out of it? And I did. We got the date together and come out, and I went over everything and anything that they were doing. And it wasn't bad because it's mostly fabrication, cutting, drilling, tapping, fabbing, laser cutting or whatever. And that's the way I got started with Pete and Jay's. We decided on a price, and I did a cash deal, and I couldn't afford to buy the California Kid, but I had my 5-window and a 63 split window Corvette coupe.
Oh my.
I traded those two for the California Kid.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I did to get the Kid. I just thought it was always, the advertising said the home of the California Kid.
Yeah.
I thought it should stay with it. So I brought it back, and in 1990?
It was 92, 99. You mean Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 99 would have been Super Bowl. Say in the late 99 or maybe even early 2000. Tim had asked earlier about Jake's Coupe, and that's when Jake's Coupe came because they were kind of right there, pretty close together. So,
well, I asked Jake about his coupe before, and Jake called me one day, and he said, left a message, said, Jerry, call me about my coupe. I knew what that was. So I was on the phone pretty darn quick.
and I remember Jake telling me, and of course, Roy Brizio saying the same thing. He said, Roy was call number 2. Call number 1 was to my dad, and Roy still kids me about that. He said, call number 2, that yellow coupe was coming to my place.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, he still jokes. He said, but it's where it belongs.
Yeah.
Pete Wood said they're like bookends.
Yeah,
That's what he told me. Pete Eastwood.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
So let's go back a little bit even more. And Jake, what did you drive when you were in school?
Oh yeah, we didn't ask that, did we?
Kind of
yeah. So my first car I've still got. So my first car was a 66 Chevy 2 Super Sport that Dad and I went down to Dothan, Alabama, and got. And so that was my first car, which as I said, I still have it. It's got
15 at the time.
Yeah, it's got about 72,000 miles on it. White red Super Sport, and still got the 283 in it, Power Glide. And so I drove that through high school, but I kept it. So that was my first car.
Novus, that was the body to own, 66 and 7.
Yeah. And what was so, of course, at my high school, it was just odd. You see something like that was just odd in a parking lot because, at that time it was the new Mustang, the 5.0 Mustang had hit. The Camaro had changed the body style. So most everything at my school, there was just me and a couple of my buddies. One of my buddies had Riley had a 72 Nova with a 307 in it. The car ran good. And then another one of my buddies, Jim, and we're still close today. In fact, I went to the Chiefs game with Riley the other night, but Jim had a 68 Camaro convertible Super Sport. That's what he ended up with. So we were just, like I said, it was odd that the three of us had these cars when everybody else, they didn't understand why we had these old cars. But
I contacted Billy Ray Bailey. Everybody down south's got 3 names.
Yeah.
And and it was in an old Hemmings ad. And he said, I think the reason I didn't sell it, my first ad, is we had a pipe break in the garage, had to fix the plumbing. And he said it ran its course and nobody called. So I called him and I said, well, give me some pictures up here of it, would you? And he says, my wife just bought one of those fancy cameras. And I said, well, what is it? He said 35 millimeter, only been out for 100 years. But she took pictures with the glove box down, the glove box up, the door open.
We got a stack of pictures.
Yeah. So I called him, and I think it was $5,500 he wanted for it.
Yep.
And I said, well, I'll just take the car. And he says, oh, you're not gonna try to Jew me on the price or nothing? I said, no. I said, will it make it home? He said, well, I need to put some tires on it. So he did. So we flew down there and drove it back.
It was I'd never been on an airplane that landed on a tarmac and they brought the stairway out.
Yep.
Mhm.
I thought that was like the coolest thing ever, because you get in on an airplane, you come out through a terminal.
Yeah.
We land and I'm looking around and they bring these stairs out. And where did we fly into?
Oh man, I don't
I
know.
remember.
Atlanta, maybe.
Yeah, I don't remember. Some small airport.
Took a puddle jump.
Yeah, that's where we ended up. Yeah. But
But
it
it
was
about the story about Billy Ray still calls.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's
So-
friends.
even, let's see, it would have been last year's nationals. It's typically every nationals is a group of guys that come up from Dothan, and they'll come by the booth, and they may not even come in and say anything. They'll be out in the hallway or out in the aisle there, and one of them will say, "Hey, you still got your Chevy too?" And I said, "Yep, I still got my Chevy too." And I asked him about Billy, and this has been a couple of years ago, but they said, "Yeah, we had coffee with him last week." I said, "Well, you tell him I still got that car."
Yeah.
See, I kind of have that
Yeah.
same story. My first car that I had, well, it was my third car, but when I was 14, I got a 64 Chevelle SS. And the guy
Mhm.
was a hot rod guy. And for years, I'd still seen, I probably seen him. He was a police chief by the Cordova drag strip in the town. I forget
Right.
there, but I'd still see him at Des Moines Good
See, they
Guys
put that.
and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the same thing, but I unfortunately don't have that Chevelle anymore. So,
I know. Late '64, they put the 300 horse in there, and that was a good running car until it still ran good. The 350 horse in '65,
yeah.
because I had two friends and one of them had each one of them.
Yeah, you had a couple of buddies that had them.
Oh, yeah. DL 79, that 350 horse, and that was a good running car.
Mine was the first half a year, so it was a 283 SS 4-speed car, and
Really?
I'm
Yeah.
still lucky to be alive. The stupid things I did with that 283
Right.
anyway. So I mean,
So
when
was
I
it a
knew I had to
4-speed?
put a motor in it, I tried blowing it up, and I'll still take a 283 over just about anything, or a 327. But yeah, hard to beat a good
It's
small
like
block.
that old Power Glide, my Chevy too, man. That whole Power Glide went through some hell,
Yeah,
but still the same one.
yeah.
So we
I
know
think
how you
our
got your
biggest learning-
influence from into
Yeah.
hot rods with
Mhm.
your dad. Was there any time in your high school, did you go to college, and was there any time that you thought, I want to do something different? Hot rods isn't where I want to go.
Well, I remember my mom still had my kindergarten picture. My first day of school. I'm standing at the bus stop wearing a Pete and Jake's t-shirt. And of course it was that old logo. And of course I get to school and it's like, what's Pete Sakes? Pete and Sakes, because the J looked like an S. But yeah, that was so for me, growing up at the parts store, I just remember my earliest memories at the parts store. Of course, before Pete and Jake's, but at the auto parts store, Ruskin Auto Parts. It probably would have been when we moved, so it would have been third grade. We had moved to a different house, and at that point, the guys, because mom was working at the auto parts store, the guys would come on deliveries and they'd pick me up. So one of the guys from the shop would deliver parts, and then he'd come by school, pick me up, and then take me to the shop. So for me, that's all I ever remember was that. I did community college when I graduated early out of high school. I was on the work release coming to work at the shop. And then I also went half a year. Well, to allow me to do that, because I had the credits, I had to go to college. So I spent half of my senior year at the community college. Of course, just around the same people I'd just gone to high school with, because most of them had just graduated the year before. So I finished up and got an associate's degree, but you know, for me, I never thought about anything any different. I mean, it's all I ever knew. So
I think our biggest learning curve in a hot rod manufacturer was Super Bowl. We'd never welded that axle before. And I knew for one thing, we had to weld that axle, you know, and you're putting mild steel tube, 250 wall into an iron, a ductile iron in. So that was usually a no, cast iron and mild steel. We tested and we tested and we tested. And I finally figured out it took a high nickel alloy rod to put those two pieces together. I forget how many passes we make over that to put that tube axle together. And then we drill it and rosette weld it too inside. I had it tested at a testing lab over in Wichita, well over 30,000 pounds. And it deflected and come back up. You know, it was never a crack around a weld or nothing at all. So that was good. And then we had to learn how to castings and what the alloys were to cast parts, because I was not going to go overseas. I stayed right here between Missouri and Kansas. We still get our hubs casted out of aluminum for the super stopper and all the other hubs that we make. And then the power stopper we cast to cast iron also. But that was a learning curve, getting all that together. It really, really was.
Yeah.
But usually the only
Super Bowl.
99.
99. Yeah. And well, what we found was, you know, Super Bowl was more or less out of, I guess we'll call it necessity, because Pete and Jake, there at the last, Pete and Jake's was about 80% of Super Bowl sales. 80% of Super Bowl sales all went to Pete and Jake's.
Yeah.
So it just made sense at that time to just, you know, just take care of that and bring it in. And since then, you know, what we found, in fact, I think you and I talked about it, Tim, when you were here last, you know, as time has gone on, you know, 50 years, there are a lot of the smaller companies that we've dealt with, machine shops, our urethane company, Brent, out of Concourse, that it's a company that we acquire once again out of necessity, because it's what helped continue. It was things that we needed. Well, the company became available, and it was more or less just tooling and other things. And that's why when you came walking around, each one of those machines was from a different acquisition, so we could do more of it in-house, so we could control more of it. As I said, urethane bushings and other things. And then from that, you get other business. We make all of the bushings for Alden Coilover, Alden America. Garrett and his team out of Alden, we do their bushings for that. So I think there's a lot of the smaller companies that came in based on that. Magnum, when Fred was ready to retire at Magnum, we got all of Magnum's tooling. And when Roy passed away up at Chassis Engineering, Gene contacted us and we got all of the drop axle tooling. So we are now.
I have his Magnum collection his daughter gave me.
Oh, do you? Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, now we're the last American-made axle, spindle, perch, lower shock mount, all the things that we know as drop axle components. We're one of the last made in America, because with all the tooling from those other companies that, you know, used to do what we do, we brought it all in-house. So
I was telling about the I-beam. We bought that tool. That tool weighed 6,000 pounds for the axle.
Yeah.
They did a 47-inch axle, which was odd, used a 30-inch spring.
Yeah.
But our biggest seller, 85% of our sales was a 46-inch. So we finally found a foundry in Youngstown, Ohio, and they did railroad business, wheels, axles, things like that. And we went up there, showed them what we wanted to do. And they went in there and welded up the tool inside with a MIG.
Just welded everything up.
And another guy come back in and cut the 46-inch axle in it. Darnest thing I ever seen. Wow. But it worked. That's the axle we're doing today.
It's Schaefer.
Yeah.
Schaefer equipment.
Still got the big tall 2-inch web in it, like a 32, but it's 46 inches. So,
and that was the axle that Roy had, which was originally from Vintage Chassis Works, VCW. No. In fact, the crazy thing about that was where that axle was originally done by VCW, that was the same forging company that's doing it for us now. Of course, none of the guys are there. It's under a different name, but that axle in the late 70s started there, went to Roy at Chassis, went all these other places, and then ended up right back where it was originally made on the same hammers that did it back in the late 70s.
Huge hammers.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You standing out in the parking lot, you feel it.
I was telling him, Colton, my son, and I went up there, and we came in the back way. You're following Google or whatever map. So we come in the back way, didn't see the sign or anything. And there's this building at Schaefer that's just, I mean, the thing's as long as a football field, and big, tall ceilings in it, of course. And we pull in, and he, Colton's asking me, well, you think this is the place? We open the doors on the rental car, and man, you hear the I said, yep, we're in the right spot.
We're close anyway. Yeah.
That's it, exactly. It's got to be in one of these buildings because I can feel it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. When last time we stopped by and you gave us a great tour, is I'm a nerd about history and everything, and like you were saying, all these different pieces of equipment, and you're like, oh, this came from this and this. And one of the coolest things, there was even like a shelf that came with the Pete and Jake's purchase that you're like, oh, see these notes and scribbles? That was from Jake himself. Like you really got everything. You're talking about Super Bell. Have you tried? You need the Super Bell coupe in your collection too.
Yeah, we do. I've tried to get it from Frank. I haven't.
You just talked to Frank the other day.
The other day he called me. Yeah. I haven't mentioned it. He said was going to give it to his daughter, but he's got me to top of the list.
Well, and it's next year
is
the 50th anniversary of Super Bell.
So hopefully you're on the list above Brizio.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you know when we were talking about when you came through, we were talking about the shelving and things. So another cool story. So we're down at Gathering at the Rock this year, and Rick Bearcat and his wife Janet, they came back. So for our open house, the Eastwood Bearcat car, he sent it back for the open house.
Two-door sedan.
Yep, the primer two-door sedan was on the cover of Hot Rod. So it was here, and they came back. We had a great time with them, and he said, I got a favor. I said, what's that? He said, well, I kind of heard rumor that you guys were driving the two cars down to Gathering at the Rock. He said, do you think I could leave that car here till October and ride down with you guys? I said, sure. So we all rolled down together, but we're sitting out in the parking lot of the hotel, and Rick's business was shelving. And so he and I started talking. We're drinking beers and we're talking. And I said, I think I've got, he mentioned that he put the shelving in Pete and Jake's shop and a couple of other shops. And I said, I think I've still got that same shelving. And sure enough, that shelving you and I are talking about came from Rick Bearcat. He was the one that got the shelving when Pete and Jake's moved into that of course, they left Blair's and rented that building at 8827 Las Tunas. He was the one that put the shelving in there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I know. So
back in the alley,
I love stories like that.
Yeah, you had Eric Vaughn in that alley where Pete and Jake's was.
Yep.
You had a Little John there for a while.
Yeah.
And it was quite a deal. It really, really was. Right there by the big reservoir alley where they used to, buses would learn to drive in that thing when it was empty, of course, all of those things like that. But I remember when Eric Vaughn, he left, Pete and Jake had his big lathe up front, and he cut out just like a cart size of the lathe. And Pete and Jake come in one morning and the lathe was gone, but that pattern in the wall was there, that big lathe.
It had a Wile E. Coyote pattern in it.
Yeah, that's what I pictured in my head. I totally did.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
Could you imagine Blair's Speed Shop where you had Shaporis and you had, of course, Eric Vaughn was doing the louvering and machine work.
Eastwood was there.
And Pete Eastwood.
Yeah.
That's where he put the first Vegas steering gear on a hot rod.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
When Pete came back, we for the open house, we went to dinner that night, and I sat next to P Wood, and it was really, really cool because throughout the time that P Wood was here for that weekend, I would be sure whenever he'd walk by, I'd stop him and we'd talk for a few minutes, and I really appreciated, each time I stopped, he'd tell me another story. Just he was trying to pass as much of that information to me as he could, just the different things. He'd walk by and he'd look at something on the shelf. He'd look at the ladder bar bushings were off of was it a control arm off of a Corvair, those original ladder bar bushings. And he talked about the ladder bars. He said, Jason, what we figured out at Blair's, of course, they weren't doing hot rods. It was drag race. They were doing, at this time it's the 70s, and it's muscle cars. It's drag race and go fast. And he said, me and Jake figured out that, ladder bars are great if you're going straight, but as soon as you try and go this way, that way, they weren't working. So of course, they took them ladder bars, they brought them into the center and triangulated them. And of course, that's where the ladder bars came from. But P. Wood, we're sitting at dinner, and he named the 5 guys that they built the first 5 32 chassis in the back of Blair's. He remembered each one of the guys' names that they did. So it was Pete and Jake and P. Wood working at Blair's at night. And that was right. He said, we figured out, or Pete and Jake figured out, that they could do 5. They could probably do more somewhere else. And that's when they both quit their jobs. And P. Wood still stayed at Blair's, but they went over and rented that shop. And then P. Wood said about a year later, it was about a year later, they got busy enough where he quit and went over there.
That's awesome.
So.
Yeah, the foundation of this hot rod and street rod stuff. So this is exactly like you talk about him telling you stories. This is why we started doing this podcast, is getting everybody's stories out. I'm a nerd. I memorize magazines. My wife get on her nerves, but this is why we're doing this basically because we do something together. And I'm selfish because I want to hear the people's stories. And I was like, well, we just need to record them so that we can put them out. To get everybody's stories out.
Well, and that's the thing. I just think about even in Kansas City, the guys we've lost, and we didn't have an opportunity to get that stuff on recording or anything.
Yeah,
it's just gone.
Yeah,
now it's just, I don't want to call it hearsay, but it's others sharing the story, which is good, which is what history is. People sharing stories down from generation to generation. But to be able to, with
3 hours with Starbird, we've got Winfield's been on here, the Tituses of KKOA, Jack Walker. We've got a bunch of these guys that are friends of mine, and sometimes you just have to set up the computer or the microphone in front of them and do it at an event to get them. But yeah, Nick.
There was a new story about the shop.
Oh yeah.
The shop Coop. That was a good story. Tom Proofer?
I know the name.
He can be a little difficult sometimes. A little difficult.
That's what P. Wood always said.
Yeah. So they were getting into it back and forth. Eastwood was building this coupe, the cop shop coupe, and he was grafting a 32 on a 34 rear chassis. And they kept arguing about this deal. And P. Wood called him up one day and he says, I'll tell you what, I got this chassis cut in 2. You come and get your half. I've had it. And he finally come over and got it all smoothed over. But that was a good story. The old car set up precedents, though. It was, it left our country. It went over to New Zealand. It left. It was last year.
Greg's got it, and boy, he's excited, which is cool. I mean, he's going
to be. He needs to do our podcast, so we're going to get his story of all. I mean, he's had a lot of. He built a yellow 32 that was basically recreation of the. Is it Kessler or Chrysler?
Exactly.
Yellow 32 Roadster.
You're right. Yeah.
Kessler, right?
Yeah. Greg's a great guy. Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he is. He's a good guy. It found a good home.
Yeah. I know he had to change some stuff because going into that country, I got a buddy that's building a car for a guy from that country, and it was like the book and the inspection is like, oh, there's got to be a brake line clamp every 12 or 14 inches and all this other safety stuff that it's not that bad. It's just some difficulty that you don't meet their inspections to title that car over there.
Well, kind of a neat story. So it probably would have been about 5 or 6 years ago. My dad had mentioned his 5 window. He traded it to Pete and Jake. as part of the deal. Well, his 5 window was sold pretty quickly, and there was a guy in Santa Barbara that had bought the car, and Dad stayed in contact with him. So this would have been '86. So Dad stayed in contact with him a little bit. Well, then that was it. So I get a phone call. Guy calls me and said, "Is Jerry Slover the owner of Pete and Jake's?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, I'm his son, Jason." And he said, I just bought a 34 5 window. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, in the package tray, where the speakers are, my dad had, was it Danny?
Yeah, a wood guy.
Yeah, Danny Gibson. Is that right? Yeah. Put a V8 in it. Well, he also surprised my dad that he engraved my dad's signature
Over in the corner.
over in the corner.
Yeah.
So this guy gets the car and he's looking in there and he looks up and over the seat and he sees Jerry Slover. Well, he just types it in, Google search, and Dad's name comes up, and he just took a chance, calls. So he sent me pictures, and I'm looking at the car, and really the only thing it changed had Zenith wires on it, and somebody had put white walls on it. They took the old gray mohair interior out of it, and they put like a black leather with some white trim. So I just gave him as much information as I could about it, and then once again I didn't hear from him again. So then I get an email from Greg, and Greg says, he says, "Jason, one of my mates, him and his son, just bought a 34 5 window from the U.S. and the guy says it was your dad's car." And sure enough, the 5 window ended up, and now it's over in New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
And so what I did is I dug through. He said, "Do you have any information on it?" And you were talking about the New Zealand, government, as to how they, the LVVTA and how they're, they monitor and help people over there. So I found old pictures, and I was able to find pictures of the chassis when it was built, how it was built. I shared all those pictures with them to try and help them in that process. But they also just wanted the history on the car. And of course, I was telling Dad, all the photos, bell bottoms, long hair. Bell bottoms, big collars, long hair. Everybody's standing around it, and it was all the guys here in Kansas City. Kurt Cunningham from the Carriage Works. Picture of JT Winfrey in the background, but just all guys I remember growing up with.
Now we all stand around, look like a bunch of Q-tips standing there.
All got white hair.
I know Kurt Cunningham. I used to have him. His company would build billet grills for us for a bunch of stuff.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Who was the Winfrey guy? That name sounds familiar.
So it's so JT Winfrey was a transmission guy originally. Am I right? Transmissions here in Kansas City. He had Winfrey's Automotive. Then just a mechanic, a real good mechanic. Kurt did him and Kurt, they grew up together, didn't they?
They graduated from high school.
Yeah, so him and Kurt graduated from high school down in Camden around the Lake of the Ozarks. And so Kurt moved up here, JT moved up here, and Dad met them early on, but that's who JT is. JT did first thing,
a couple of sedan deliveries.
Yeah, Model A sedan deliveries. And then he did didn't he do 2 37 Cabriolets?
Just one for.
Oh yeah, one 37 steel Cabriolet. And but yeah, that's who JT is. So just great friend of Kurt's. They grew up together, so they've known each other their whole lives.
Cool.
Kurt's just living the life now, man. He's making and reproduce signs.
Yeah, Kurt's doing. Have you been to Kurt's shop in a while or not?
No, because he sold Carriage Works, right?
He did. Well, he sold. He had CW, or he had Carriage Works was doing laser. He had the big lasers, and he sold that to a gentleman by the name of Nick Brown. In fact, Nick still does all of our laser cutting for us up at one of Kurt's shops up there. And Kurt and his son Matt, they reproduce the neon signs, the big automotive neon signs.
Ford
and
cars.
So they do all the antique signs.
Cool.
Yeah. I haven't seen Cunningham in a little bit. I've seen his cars and left a business card in it when I've been at a show or something like that. But yeah, I always thought.
Sure. Yeah, he was with us down at Gathering at the Rock. He came down. He was down there with us also.
Yeah, because what was his brother was. I always dealt with Walt was his brother.
Walt. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Walt. Yeah, and his son Matt. was there. Matt and I are, Matt is 1 year younger than I am. So,
Because there's somebody down there.
so
maybe
Matt and I
it's
grew up.
that I've been in touch with about building me some billet grills. They said they could still do that. Joel Kokoska, you probably know Joel, right? That he was originally from where he went to school there and he worked for Will.
Oh, yeah, I know Joe very well.
And he got me in touch with somebody
Uh-huh.
that got some of the grill building equipment, but I can't remember his name because, yeah, I needed a billet.
Well, I bet that was probably, I'm thinking, I'm wondering if it was Nick, because Nick, he's the one that bought the laser cutting business
Okay.
and all of the grill pieces as well. So it's probably Nick. Yeah.
So, okay, we haven't
Yeah.
really touched
That sport
on
truck was on.
the chassis. Do you guys build
Mhm.
chassis and been building chassis this whole time, right?
We have, yeah.
Yeah.
I started building them in 77. You know, I couldn't call somebody at Brizio and say, what's the setback on a big block? You know, how much you got to cut out? You got to put a recess this or do that, or how wide, what motor mount being used. I knew I had to get into chassis business in order to be able to sell what I was going to do. And the first year I went into chassis business, we put every drive line through a
That was
32 and
87.
34
Yeah.
that you could do.
Yeah.
And that's what got me to sell parts. They didn't do a 4-bar for a 32 in the rear. They did ladder bars only. So I introduced a triangulated and a parallel 4-bar for a 32 to incorporate it within my X member, you know, that I did. I did a round tubing X member, moved the lower leg forward so I could put the butterfly bracket up underneath and still get the clearances that I needed. But with that come a lot of parts. When you do a chassis, you need all the other things that's in there, you know, master cylinder mounts and drop axles and all the hairpin radius rods. See, they didn't do a hairpin. I did the first hairpin for Pete and Jake's also.
Yeah. And of course, they, you know, the product line, when we got Pete and Jake's, the product line was still primarily based on original chassis.
Model 8.
Yeah, the 33, 34, it was all original X member, original pieces. So that first 2 years, 87 and 88, we owned Pete and Jake's. I think we introduced,
40 some new parts.
yeah, we had to,
40 new products.
you know, because we had to get things caught back up, caught back up with everybody else.
Yeah.
Because at that time, reproduced rails were being done for 32s. So, you know, guys were taking X members out and they were fabricating X members. So then that's when we started to do the tubular X member. And still today, we sell tubular X members to guys that are doing their own frames. They got a pair of rails. We'll send them a tubular X member. And then they can run the rest of our pieces and parts. So that was a big change.
They come out of necessity of the chassis.
Yeah.
We had to do it. We couldn't call everybody and say, how does this fit? Can you put a 700 R4 behind this and where does that fall? We couldn't do it. We just had to do it.
Well, and at the same time, too, like you mentioned earlier, Tim, that's when the glass bodies, Gibbon, and those glass bodies were coming on the scene, heavy and strong. So guys didn't want to put an original frame and put a brand new body on it.
Mhm.
So then that, of course, kicked that off. And we did a lot of chassis for Gibbon because of geography, location, them being up in Gibbon, Nebraska, us being just south of Kansas City, and we had a good working relationship with them. So that really opened that up as well as other glass manufacturers too. But that really opened things up. And
but I followed Henry Ford specs, like on the rear kick-up at the back, outside the outsides is 40 inches. I had guys call me and say, man, I can't get my body down over your rail. I said, what's it measure? He said, well, it measures 40 inches. And I said, you're calling the wrong guy. You need to call the glass guys, get them to fit that 40-inch dimension,
Well, and I think a lot of them, there in that early era, a lot of guys were making chassis and they'd make them fit their bodies. Well, then, of course, like we just talked about, you get a body, and now you're trying to put it on a Henry Ford frame or whoever's frame. And if you went off a Henry Ford specs, it's not going to fit. It's just too tight. So then they're in there having to grind the body to get it to drop over. So there was just a lot of that in the early days that was going on that, and of course, the glass manufacturers, they were just getting started, just like the chassis guys and the suspension guys had done 15 years before. So there was a lot of, learning curves on what they were doing. So, but yeah, so much of that was just out of necessity.
It
So,
was, yeah. putting ladder bars in that reproduced chassis,
Yeah.
lower cross member, it goes straight back, that type of thing, and kept the ladder bars in the same dimension. As far as the length, if every chassis, Model A through 30 or Model A through 48, is the same ladder bar kit, except for the cross member.
Well, and I think one of the big things too that, in fact, you and I talk about it is when somebody calls and they've got a technical question, when you start the conversation out, this is how we do it. Well, they immediately know you've done it. I mean, they immediately know you're not looking at a manual, you're not looking at notes. Well, this is how we do it. Here, I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but this is how we do it.
Mhm.
So immediately somebody on the other end of the phone's like, okay, I've got the right guys. Now this is how they do it, and they can follow suit or change it up a little bit. But I just think that is so.
Plus, we've always kept original chassis over there, Tim. Nice 32.
Well, you've seen them hanging on the wall.
A couple 34s,
Yeah.
35 through 40. We got all that hanging over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
See, when I went up,
makes a difference.
when you said his name, I'm like, Roy's Chassis Engineering, because one of my best buddies, he was building their sway bars for me, his company by Peoria, Illinois, and they were just buying sway bars from him at Chassis Engineering. And when he passed away, I went there with my buddy, and his daughter was starting to sell stuff, and he still had a stack of original frames and selling all the chassis tables and all that. I tried getting a chassis table, but I missed out on that. So
yeah. Now that sway bar company, what's the name of that company?
it's
You remember?
is it still Parker Fabrication?
I think so.
The only reason I say it, because that's where we still get our sway bars. Because when we got some of the stuff from Gene, the drop axle sway bar, Parker still is the same place that does it. In fact, I think I know who your buddy is,
Chuck.
because I've talked to him.
Always
What's that?
he got the beard and wears bib overalls all the time. He always comes to Louisville.
I think you're right. I've met him once. I've talked to him on the phone, but I've met him once. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. So this is crazy how I call him my brother. Like he went to my Hall of Fame induction. My niece calls him Uncle Chuck. How I met him. This is a good car story. I had my Chevelle. I built my Chevelle in 19. I started winning awards. Well, 19, 20 years old, I wanted to build a custom and a Pro Street. So I found this 54 Chevy at down by Morton, Illinois, south of Morton, for like $150, rusty piece of crap, because I was going to cut everything out, cut the floor and everything. The guy that I bought that car from was Chuck's dad, and I've just been buddies with him ever since. So yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Well, right when you said sway bars, I'm thinking, wait, he's talking about Parker.
Yep, that's Chuck. Yep.
Yeah. That's
So
great.
you're still doing chassis. What is you say? What's the model of the car of your most sold chassis through all the years? Is it a 32, a 33, or Model A?
Yeah, probably. Well,
Model A and 32.
yeah, Model
They're
A
close.
32, and I still think 33, 34 because of the California kid. That's just such an influence there. But I think now one of the big things, Tim, is even now we'll still do. We'll build whatever they want. So many chassis manufacturers that are out there, they have a package A, a package B, or a package C. And if what you want doesn't fall within that, well, that isn't what they do. Well, because we know so many of the guys in the industry, they just say, hey, call Pete and Jake's, because they'll build you whatever you want. You want a quick change, or you want, something pinched or stretched or pulled or
stretched.
whatever. We'll still do that. It doesn't matter to us, because with as many chassis as we've done, I don't know if we've ever done 132 the same. I'm sure we probably have, but there's always something different about it. Right now, over in the chassis shop, we've got a 35 through 44 chassis. It's building a new chassis, tubular X member. It's got parallel leaf in it, but it's got a flathead T5 with split wishbones. We had him send us his original wishbones.
Wow.
And we're putting a drop axle and wishbone in a brand new chassis. Of course, could have been an IFS, but that's not what he wanted. Yeah. So there's an example. You call somebody, and every 35 through 40 chassis that you, like me, have seen in every magazine and everywhere is either got an IFS or a Mustang 2 or a derivative of an independent. And this guy wanted a drop axle and a set of split wishbones, and we put them on a brand new frame.
Cool. And then now, of course, when you started building the chassis, and it was 48 and older stuff. So tell everybody what I know you got truck chassis, all kinds of things. Are you doing like you say you got that 66, 67 Nova? Are you doing a Nova front clip for those too?
We're not right now. I've got one of the things that in fact just popped up. One of our good friends, Mark Rakusik here in town. We did oh gosh, how many years ago was that? Probably 30 years ago. He brought over is this a 56? 55 Chevy chassis, and we did put a front end under it from the old Jim Meyer Racing.
I know.
Yeah, I think it was Jim Meyer Racing. We put one of them front ends under it and put ladder bars 9-inch Ford, and we did that car for him. Well,
Big block Chevrolet.
Yeah, all these years later, he calls me and says, I think I want to do a gasser. So laying over in the shop, I've got a Tri-5 Chevy set of rails, and he's going to come over and pick them up and test fit them, to what he wants to do for the body. And we're going to take a Super Bell axle, put a parallel leaf under it, and do a gasser.
Oh, cool.
So this upcoming year, we're going to do a Tri-5 Chevy gasser chassis for him. So that'll be something that we're going to start offering. But we do the 55 through 59 Chevy trucks, the 46 to 54 Chevy truck, F1, F100 trucks. We do those. And once again, that was it. Like so much of our stuff, we get a phone call from a dealer, phone call from a friend, phone call from a customer. Hey, can you do X, Y, whatever it is? I don't know. Let's see. And then all of a sudden it turns into, yeah, we can do it. And that's where so many of the products that
Did you get to see the Bel Air, Tim? We did the 62.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. What's it?
Yep.
Armstrong, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Craig.
Yeah, Craig Armstrong. Yeah.
Killer car.
Craig and Donna.
Killer.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a big car.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a learning curve, and we channeled it down just about 3 inches over the rail. Only one I've ever seen done that way.
Yeah, just so a little bit of a custom thing done with it. So there are some things that
And that car last year got a top 30 at the Triple Crown. So that's
it did.
You're right.
You're right. Yeah.
I think my buddy, because it's been at he had it at the Lead Sleds too in Salina.
Yeah, you're right. He did.
Carl Casey did some of the paint and body on it, or all the paint and body on it.
That's why it ended up there.
Yeah,
Carl
you're
wanted
right.
it to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
there
I'm sure you know Carl, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very well. Yeah. Me and him
It's
spent
big painter.
a week at Daryl Starbird's building a bubble top mold. Or as Daryl calls it, a mold.
Really?
I'll remember that week. That was just a handful of years ago. I'll remember that week for the rest of my life. That me and Carl working
That's
with Daryl Starbird, and yeah, he's a little cantankerous
Yeah,
to work for. Yeah, he expects a lot out of you. There's a reason why I don't have employees, because I think I'm cut from that same. Yeah. You got that done yet? You got that done yet? Yeah.
Why does it take so long?
Exactly. Hey, what are you doing over there? Get back
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah.
What are you doing it that way for?
Yeah. You and Carl quit
Double tap
visiting.
is
Get back to
cool.
work. Keep putting screws in those wood things. So,
Hey, quit talking, more working.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
double top, you can't screw that car up, Tim. That
Yeah.
car is a good looking body style.
Yeah, bubble
Oh,
tops
yeah.
are good cars. Yeah.
I've got a Pontiac, same rear window, the 61 Catalina
Oh, yeah.
Ventura. Yeah, with a 4-speed and bench seat and tri-power 389, 8 lug wheels, 57,000 axle on it.
Yeah,
My
when
old
you-
Chevrolet,
you
I got
see
the
the 8-lug
68,
wheels. That just is the cherry on the top with those cars with the 8-lug wheels on them. That's
It is.
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, I've got a window sticker. I got the bill sheet, quite a bit of stuff. So I'm the second owner of that car. Then I got a 68 427 Biscayne also. Stuff
Oh.
down there. L72, big block, 427, M21 with a 410 posi. And a good looking color. It's a maroon with a black guts inside.
Mhm.
It's that 17,000 miles?
15,000.
15,000
15,000 actual miles.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah.
I think they built 124, if I remember right.
So
I've
that's
had
like
that car
muscle
for-
car stuff. I figured you just have a string of street rod stuff, but I guess you gotta like them all.
I had
Exactly. Don't we all? I mean,
Yeah.
if the biggest thing is money and space. If we had money and space, we'd all have more.
Yeah, we would.
Yeah. There's a
Agreed.
reason my wife don't give me an allowance, because I'd have way more cars than I have. I still don't have room for all.
I
the-
understand.
Yeah.
I get it.
I bet she wishes you collected tennis shoes. It'd be a whole lot less space.
He
Man,
collects Hot Wheels, and you know how
And-
little those are? They take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
they do.
Tubs,
Yeah, we went
Yep.
to a Christmas party at Drag Race Friends the other day, and they let us know that they had a Hot Wheels track for racing for kids and adults. Adults, you had to buy in, so allegedly there might have been some illegal betting. So we tested one night with our Hot Wheels.
There you go.
Friday night, we were an hour and a half testing Hot Wheels in our house, and then I bought dry lube and graphite, and used a drill like the Pinewood Derby guys do. Yeah, we showed up with a serious, like a case full of tweaked up Hot Wheels, and one of our fastest was a 40 Ford.
Hey, are those things factory? No, not really.
No, because the 40 Ford was our biggest money maker. Terry taped a quarter on it to make it go faster for the weight of the
Oh, really?
yeah,
That's kind
We're
of
good.
yeah, 40 Ford
Get a
Woody
little weight on
our
it.
fastest cars. So yeah,
Yep.
good.
We didn't cover the aluminum axle. I decided to do an aluminum axle, and it was quite a deal. Everybody said it can't hold up, can't do it. Well, I went out to a forging house in California, and we forged it out there. And the prototype, we tested it again, up over 35,000 pounds.
We still use that lab, Tim, over in Wichita.
To
Yeah,
test it.
Aero Lab.
Mhm.
They do. We still test axles. We mentioned New Zealand. I still pre-test axles for the guys over in New Zealand.
Got to have a certificate.
Yep,
Yeah.
I do
Oh,
that for them, for the Justin and the guys over at the LVVTA.
But the material in that axle is a 7175 T75 heat treat. So it's what they make an F-15 stretch for
Mhm.
out of, and all that
Landing
kind of
gear.
thing.
Yep.
And Rodak motors, same kind of aluminum. So and the only thing that I didn't allow for was the machining. Of course, you put the camber in there.
Deflection
Was deflection on the aluminum deflects differently than iron or steel, either one, of course. So no failures, never had a failure.
Yeah.
We had a guy twist one up, drag racer, and
Yeah, he gave us the axle back. You may have seen it hanging on the wall, but it took that aluminum axle and completely 90'd it. And it took a set of our hairpins, 90'd those, and our batwing, our welded batwing that we do, and completely twisted it up. He said, I just wanted to share this stuff with you because there's not a weld on it that broke. And that aluminum axle, that thing was twisted and bent. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen, man.
Why did you think there was a need for an aluminum axle after all that time?
just to be different. I just knew that we could do it.
Somebody told you it couldn't be done.
Yeah, I
Had to prove
talked
it
to,
wrong. Yeah.
Well, sprint cars and race cars, they had aluminum axles.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, what in the heck is that all about? Splined and rear ends and all that. So that's what got me thinking about it. So I contacted Honda. Can you remember what's the name of the forging house?
I don't remember now, but that would have been, what was that, 2000?
Oh, yeah, somewhere in there.
2001?
Mhm.
Somewhere like 2000,
But I put a 2-inch tall web on it, like a 32. And that's what made it look nice. I drilled it, and I remember, you remember the
Aluma tub.
Yeah, Aluma tub.
Yeah, the
the tub that Boyd built.
or was it because it wasn't the Aluma coupe, it was the Aluma tub.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did that. Yeah.
It had aluminum frame rails and everything
Yeah,
like that.
we sent him an axle.
Oh, we did. I sent him an axle for it.
Yeah.
And he run it on Bonneville out there.
In fact, the aluminum axle, Tim, was the pattern after we designed it, putting the wide web in it, but leaving the narrow upsweep like a normal super bell. So where it left the perch and went up, that still looks like a super bell, but the belly was wider. That was the same drawing that I gave to Schaefer up at Wabtec, where they did the forged axle.
46.
That was the drawing I gave them. So our 46 steel forged axle looks like the aluminum axle, exact same axle, same shape, same everything. So that's what we use that same drawing to do it.
But you had to account for the clearance steering arms going left to right in the ratio and all that kind of stuff. And we did a 46, so we could utilize a 29-inch spring on a perch centers being 34 3/8. So that was our biggest seller, was 46, keeping the wheel and tire well underneath the fenders, to do that.
Yeah.
So I only did one. Everybody said, "You're going to do a wider one?" I said, "I can't afford it."
We're doing one, and that's
it. It was $68,000 to forge that axle.
Wow.
With the two.
We still do. We mentioned tube axles where Super Bell started. There's been a resurgence of tube axles.
I know there is.
Yeah, we're building more tube axles now than than I'd ever thought.
And we got two fixtures, you know, to weld those axles up. I got Magnum's fixture.
Yeah,
also.
there was
Just a
only
duplicate of Super Bowl.
Yeah, there was only two fixtures ever done.
Yeah.
One was Super Bowl and one was Magnum.
Yeah.
And now we've got both. Well, I think you saw one of them, or maybe both of them when you were here. I think I may have had axles set up in them.
Full.
Other than the looks of a tube axle to a webbed axle, what is the advantages one way or the other? Why would somebody do that? Is it just
Yeah,
look?
Yeah, just
It's
just
strength.
looks.
I think it's a little stronger than
Yeah.
an I-beam.
Yeah.
You know, Henry made them to where they would deflect and move, and because that's the reason he had no caster in anything, and everything had to twist, and the wishbones were on a ball. That thing, and there wasn't no roads.
Yeah,
to drive on.
it pivoted this way, so the
Ditches.
axle can move and twist.
Ditches.
I had an old
Yeah.
street rod guy one time that maybe he was just full of crap, because sometimes I used to be gullible. Now I'm the guy that tells stories to people to see if they're actually paying attention. But one guy told me a tube axle is for a front for 4 bars, and you wouldn't put hairpins on a tube axle. You would
Right.
use the web axle. Is that right? Or
Well,
was he talking looks wise?
Well, it was, and it's
Well,
the
I-beam would twist.
yeah.
That Super Bell tube axle will not.
So when guys talk about now, and sometimes it's terminology, and you know this too, Tim. Terminology. Sometimes guys they'll use the term wishbone, and to us, a wishbone is an original Henry Ford wishbone. But to some guys, a wishbone is a hairpin. You know,
Okay.
we know it as a hairpin,
Yeah.
but it's just a terminology difference. So when you think about a Henry Ford wishbone, of course, that is solid. It doesn't move. You know, you look at a wishbone and there's no twist to it. So when you talk about putting it on a tube axle, nothing's giving. So now you've got an axle that doesn't give, and you've got a pair of wishbones that doesn't give. Well, the theory is that eventually over time, those two things working together are going to find something that'll give way.
Okay.
And that's why, you know, Magnum was this way. Super Bell, before we owned Super Bell, back in Magnum, you know, that was always I don't want to call it the disclaimer, but the warning. We don't recommend using wishbones on a tube axle. Now, have I ever seen one come apart? No, but the theory is still relevant. Now, hairpins, when you think about a hairpin comes back, well, you know, if you take a hairpin, you can squeeze it like this with your hands. You know, you can take a hairpin and squeeze
Open
it
and close it.
and open and close it. So there's your flex. So a hairpin still has flex in it.
And we put caster in them.
Yeah, and we put, of course, with the hairpin with top bars always shorter than the bottom part to naturally allow that caster. But that's what you're talking about. That's what he was referring to, and that's why, you know, of course, the 4-bar or hairpin, because it's got flex, is what we'll typically use on a solid axle.
Henry had to have that axle twist. Had
Yeah.
to sit way up in the air, and that old wishbone was moving all the time. And it usually in one ditch to the other ditch. Wasn't no roads. Didn't have roads. But and I remember seeing a photo, 1933 Chicago World's Fair.
Yeah.
They took it out of I-beam and spiraled it, you know, bent it in circles.
Oh,
I
wow.
remember that. And then they had the chassis setting up on raised lifts on each side where the thing was sitting all cockeyed.
They had it like up on one corner and
Yeah,
down on one
to show you
corner.
how much it would move. Yeah,
How much twist was in his frame.
that was cool.
I always liked the look. Of course, when I got into street rods and stuff, I was, you know, mid-late 80s. I always liked that look of a fenderless tube axle car with coilovers on it. And I still like
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we did. Well, you remember, Bill Paul that did the California Kid truck, the California Kid Express this year.
Yeah.
We did a 32 Roadster for Bill. Oh gosh, when was that? Late 90s?
Yeah, probably.
Like you're talking about, tube axle, 32 Roadster, had a Lingenfelder big block in it, red Roadster, had the tube axle with the coilovers leaned back on it. I remember doing one of those. And I think we did, we talked earlier about the Viper 2. We did a Viper 2 that way, where we did a tube axle, 5-inch drop tube axle, lean the coilovers back on it. You're right. It's just a clean look.
Yeah.
But we do, you know, all the Alloway cars. You know, when Bobby was doing, you know, the Alloway, you know, he did all those coupes, and the 33, 34s. They had that tube axle.
They did.
It was a 45-inch axle we did for Bobby.
Mhm.
He did it for the offset for the wheels Boyd did for him.
Mhm.
And then we had Posey make a spring because it had to be a narrower spring because we brought in the kingpin centers from 46 to 45. Well, you had to have a 1 inch narrower spring to be able to do that, pull all that off. So all those cars that Alloway did all had Super Bell tubes under them.
That was one of my questions. That's one thing, you guys don't make your own springs, right?
Correct. Yeah, we use a Posey spring.
Okay.
There's a mono that we do. The same company that does all of our coil springs out of California, Bet Spring, they do a 29 mono for us that we use in certain applications. But 98% of all of our springs come from Posey.
Yeah. We did a 32. The last 32 axle car I did it. I used a mono spring on the front of it. I forget what brand.
Yep.
There's probably not many.
Our spring that we did don't break. There is some monos out there that do.
Well,
Yeah.
and
I get the calls.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is, as with anything set up, it's where guys are trying to take an axle and lean an axle back to get more caster, but yet the cross member isn't set for that much caster, and they get that spring just in a twist. And of course, adjustable perches. That's why that's where that came from.
Sure.
Being able to adjust that and roll that axle
Like
back.
still using original cross members. That's where that came. There's no
Exactly.
caster built in.
Yeah.
So
Stock cross member.
It followed this cross member,
Right.
but the adjustable perch would go back.
Yeah, you're trying to move everything back to get the right caster out of it. Yeah.
That's it.
Did I just see a shop cat?
No, it's our shop dog Bo.
Okay.
My son comes to me and he says, I gotta leave, and Bo's at the groomers, which is around the corner, and he said, I don't know what to do, I've got to go. And I said, well, go get Bo and just leave Bo here. So Bo's the one wandering around our
Okay.
shop
I was
dog.
like,
Where
wait
is
a minute.
Bo?
that
Oh,
cat
he's
shut
around
up.
he's around here somewhere. Yeah, he's trying to figure out going, what, it's 7:30. Why the hell are we still at work? I
Right?
should already be home and had dinner
Yeah.
and be sitting on the sofa.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, he's a good dog.
Yeah, he's a good dog.
Great dog. Yeah.
We're pet people. So,
Yeah, we talk about cats a lot. We used to have a dog, but we travel too much. Now we have 2 cats, and she held the cat for a little bit, and then the one cat made a circle around all the screens and cameras and everything. We're just like, oh, don't.
All over.
Knock it over.
Yeah, Bo comes in each day with my grandkids, my grandson Wyatt, my Colton. You've met Tim. My son works here, and his wife Molly, and so they bring Wyatt in. He's 4th generation, so he hits the door. First place he's got to go, showroom, and we always know when he's in Jake's coop, because Jake's coop, his horn works.
Yeah.
California kid doesn't have a horn. Jake's coop, horn works. We know when Wyatt's in Jake's coop because we hear the horn.
That's awesome.
So you said your son works there and his wife works there?
Yes, so Colton is my son, and Molly, his wife, works here. And
Colton's the one that comes to Louisville and was probably at Triple.
that's him. Yeah. He's one that drives the truck and the trailer and comes. And then Tina, my wife, you've met Tina before,
Mhm.
and then my daughter and her husband.
Tina's the one that gave me the wrong T-shirt at Triple Crown.
Wait,
Yeah.
hey, she's not here. We'll blame her. So once she sees this podcast, I'll catch hell for that. But that's
But you know me, I buy a new T-shirt from you. You got usually at Louisville. I bought it at the at Pomona. This last one when you had
right.
I wear out my Pete and Jake shirts, and I have to buy a new one every year. So now I just have 2 to wear out. So yeah.
We had a Debbie that works for us. We got an email from a guy over in England and sent a picture of his Pete and Jake's T-shirt. I've seen a lot of wore out Pete and Jake's T-shirts. I have never seen a wore out Pete and Jake's T-shirt like this. This thing had holes all over it. So we sent him another T-shirt, and he sends us a picture back, him wearing the new T-shirt. I said, "This looks a whole lot better."
I think I probably
What that Triple
the
Crown?
Nats,
Good show.
my uncle took me the Street Rod Nats well before I had my driver's license, and I know I bought a Pete and Jake shirt before I had my driver's license. So
yeah,
in the 80s I bought, and I don't have it. She doesn't believe me because I don't throw away anything, even old T-shirts. And but the little ones, my mom would, when I grew out of them, she wouldn't keep them for me. So
That Triple Crown's a good show, isn't it, Tim?
oh yeah, I like it because it's 45 minutes from my house, so that's his.
And all the pro builders are there.
yeah, it's a neat show. And once again, just kind of a reinvention of a show, you know. I mean, that's what Bobby and Gary did. They just, you know, did something different, you know, and that's what's so cool about it.
Yeah, and the first year it was just like, oh yeah, as a respect for Gary Case and Bobby Alloway, all the true hot rodders are going to come to this. And then last year it was like double the size. I don't even know where they're going. I know they're supposed to be able to have the grass infield back this coming 2025 because they couldn't park cars on the grass this year because the IndyCar season championship was the next weekend, so they couldn't burn and stomp up the grass. So we should have that much group. You know, I'm lucky they hire me to keep me out of trouble, so I get to do interviews and a bunch of stuff like that with Kevin Ostie. So I enjoy doing that. But yeah, that's a great show. I have not been to the Rock yet. I keep missing it. Have something else. You know, I'm friends with, you know, the guys at the Hot Rod Garage that help put it on.
Yeah, Jason and Buzz.
Yeah, they're just good people. I mean,
oh my gosh, yeah. They it's such a neat show. You know, Jason and his family, they're a wonderful family, wonderful people down there, but they do a great job with that show. I always tell people, I said, you go down there and if you shoot black and white, you just went down and shot black and white pictures, it would, I mean, it's almost period correct. You know, I mean, it's you just can't tell the difference, but just it's a neat atmosphere. And when you go down there, you know, Jason, when he was doing the awards this year, he hit it on the head. It's like a family reunion. I mean, that's really what it is, because there's, you know, for us, what's so cool is, you know, he doesn't really have vendors down there. So we don't have to worry about vendor badges, vendor gate, going and working. You know, I mean, we drove the cars down there. We get down there, we roll in, and it's just, you know, my son Colton, he drove Jake Shella Coupe. Tina and I drove the California Kid. And but for him, it was one of the first shows that, you know, he got to drive a hot rod to and not have to pull a trailer, you know, not have to work a show, you know. So it was you know, for us to be able to do it, it's refreshing, you know. And that's one of the reasons,
like when I get to do something like that, it reminds you, oh, this is fun driving our hot rods. This is why we do this. You know,
exactly.
You get stuck in the business side of it and you forget the fun side of it. So
I know
people come up to you drove this car?
So I told Dad I was the reliability runs on Friday morning. So we roll out and got the California Kid there, and Jake's Coupe's behind it, and Bearcat, you know, him and Janitor behind us, and Craig Armstrong, you know, with the bubble top. He's got a real nice 32.3 window that he ended up, that was built by a good friend of ours, Ed Buckengren, up in the Twin Cities. But we're sitting there, and the guy comes up to me, he says, "Wow," he said, "this is a real car." And I said, "Yeah." And so we talked for a few minutes. He said, "You think it'll do okay, you know, on the reliability run?" And I said, "I sure hope so, because it's taking me home." And he said, "You drove it here?" I said, "Yeah, I drove it." Like, you know, "Are you sure this car's going to make it?" Well, man, I hope so, because it's my ride home.
So how many miles are on both of those cars? Do you know?
So 100,000 hot rod miles, we think.
When I was, I got to spend, Tina and I got to spend a week with Carol and Pete when we went to the Moon Eye show in Yokohama. That would have been 2000, I don't remember, 2006 maybe.
We want to
but so the California Kid, they took it over there, and so
in a container.
So Pete and I just, you know, we had a week just to kind of sit and talk, and it was a lot of fun. We you know, had a great time together. But that was one of the things we kind of kicked around, and you know, he just kind of, you know, would think about it, and so that, near as we can figure, that car's probably got about 130,000-140,000 miles on it. Or he said, "Jason, it's got to have more." But you know, you try and think down. And Jake's Coupe, I don't know how many miles are on Jake's Coupe now. And you know, of course, you know, both of them guys, they drove them old cars hard. I mean, they drove them. You know, it's always cool because we get, you know, when the cars are out, we hear stories from other people, and that's why Dad is always, you know, when somebody asks him about what's it like to own the California Kid, Dad's always said the same thing: "I don't own it, I just take care of it." Because everybody owns a piece of it. Everybody owns, you know, a piece of of the car with a story, with something about it, especially this year. I think this year more than ever, because being 50 years old, people sharing stories with us.
Metter told us a story about when they went back to Winston-Salem. And that's east is where that's used to be. And he said, man, when them three cars, the Super Bell Coupe
Yep.
and Jake and Pete, he said, you would have thought the Pope had arrived.
I mean, people were running. They were running to the,
Look
you
at
know,
those cars.
to the entrance road.
You see them in all
coming
the
in.
magazines.
Yeah.
But, never got to see him in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's how I am. I'm a magazine nerd. So all the cars were rock stars. The car builders were rock stars. And,
Yeah.
I didn't follow sports. I mean, I followed drag racing back as a kid, but
Right.
the hot rod builders. I mean, now I'm pretty lucky to a lot of these guys. I got their number and their cell phone that I can just call them up, and
Right.
actually some of them actually remember my name.
Some of them answer.
Well, you know, I've had I'll never forget a story. We were at the Nationals one year, and the car was there. I don't know what anniversary it was, but guy comes up to me and opens up his wallet and pulls out a picture, and it was a picture of him holding his daughter. And so I'm talking to him, and he said, "There's my daughter, and she's grown now, of course, and there's my granddaughter." So I made sure we were able to get a picture of him and his daughter and his granddaughter again. And so he had another picture for his wallet.
Nice.
But that's just what that car means to people. I mean, it just, it you know, it means something to them. And that's why for us, you know, we want to be good stewards and caretakers of that car. As well as, you know, as well as the businesses, you know, that was a big deal to Dad, you know, to make sure that the business, you know, continued, that we've got two guys' names attached to it. And we want to make sure that, you know, for them and their families, that we do it justice. And, you know, I think we've done a pretty good job of that. So
Just
You
like
got
the
the
motor.
next generation there working, so it's
Yeah.
the future's
Yeah,
in.
like the motor, I could have got a new motor from Angelo at Ford Motorsports. And Pete says, "Oh no, we got to overhaul that."
yeah,
I said, "Okay, come on back and help me. We just teach it a little bit, but we rebuilt it, so the original motor's still in it."
That was a good guy too. That I wish I could have got an interview with him. Was Angelo from Ford Performance?
Oh,
We-
yeah.
we worked
Oh,
with
yeah.
him on a project or two in the past.
And he was good for the industry, wasn't he?
yeah.
Yeah. I had meetings with him at SEMA, and he was just kind of a little hesitant, and he was just
Yeah.
kind of really, and like didn't really know me.
Right.
But then I heard then when we got I don't want to say what, but we got a really good deal with him on a project on a Ford Cobra motor, and
Mhm.
the guy that he called to check up on me to make sure I was legit was Bobby Alloway, because him and Andrew were tight. He's like, "Well, that's pretty good that Bobby Alloway gave me a good recommendation at Ford Performance." So yeah.
And then before that, it was Roy Brizio. Yeah,
Yeah.
because Roy built him a couple of cars,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
and so that was cool.
Yeah.
And you know, he got him to start putting Ford motors in there, and we still do it today. Quite a few. We do.
Yeah. Angelo worked on that, you know, because he'd asked Roy, he said, "Why don't you guys put more Ford motors in?"
Yeah.
Well, of course, you know, Roy started telling him, you know, oil pans. Well, we got to use an oil pan out of a Bronco.
Mhm.
They don't make that oil pan anymore.
Or a van.
Or a van. And you know, we put Vega steering in them. Oil filter comes right out and hits the box.
Mhm.
And then water pumps.
Low radiator,
You know, Ford had,
on the left.
had so many different water pumps. And I'll be darned, you know, Angelo got it done. You know, he did that super short water pump that everybody uses now.
Inch and 5/8 shorter
Yeah.
in pellet,
And then
and he got a pulley set to match.
Yeah, and then he did that oil filter where it kicked it
Relocate.
around 90 degrees
Relocate.
and shot the oil filter out the front. So you use a short, but those are just little things that Angelo said, "By gosh, we're going to make it happen," and he did.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it worked, and
Yeah.
Ford believed in the hot rods because they bought magazine ads and like the Super
Right.
Rich magazines and stuff. They have big,
Yeah.
big
I
presence.
did. We did several chassis for them to put in the booth. I think there was 4 or 5 that we did to put in their booth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and they took them all to the Nationals.
Yeah.
Which was kind of cool.
So we talked about, as we're like 2 hours in here, you never envisioned on the industry would be as big and crazy and high tech as when you got into it.
Okay.
What do you think is coming in the future in the hot rodding side?
I don't know. It's going to be hard to say. at my age, I think we've done it all.
Yeah.
You know, it's come full circle though, and the fact that they're reproducing everything, it seems like now.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and I think what's going to happen, and we've talked about it, and I've talked about it with other guys too, and you and I may have talked about it, Tim. You know, with guys my dad's age and older, you know, they like so many collected. You know, we talk about, you know, steel cars and things like that and pieces and parts. And there are massive, massive collections of this stuff that are out there.
Yeah.
Well, we're already starting to see, you had mentioned it about auctions and other things. You're starting to see that, lack of a better term, we'll call it inventory. Inventory is starting to come out.
Yeah,
You know,
I
the
call them being
inventory.
released back into the wild.
Exactly, exactly. Well, you know, and it's I was talking to P Wood about, you know, somebody had mentioned it to him, and you know, P Wood kind of walked away and smiled, and I was standing there, and he said, Jason, this is the same thing we heard when we were at Blair's. Why are you guys messing with them old hot rods? Because it's muscle cars. You know, this is what's going on now. And he said, Jason, it's the same way it was then. He said, not long after that, here comes the hot rod starts coming. It's just a clock. It just comes back around. And, you know, you've seen it. Yeah, you've seen it in your lifetime as well, like I have. I mean, things are rotating back around. So
yeah, I think the street rod stuff is coming on a little strong. I don't think it'll ever be as big as it was for the 48 and older stuff because of all the muscle car stuff and the performance and all that. But one thing that I judge on, well, one, I got a buddy that's 25, 26 years old. He just loves traditional hot rods. Of course, that's what he grew up. He loves the old school. He's got a Model A Vicky. And like when I go to a lot of places going race announcing on weekends, and I always stop, and Gary says I bother people. I stop and see a shop, like I've been by your place. And what I like to see is maybe they're building Camaros and Chevelles and Mustangs for people, but what's the guy that owns the shop a lot of times has a 48 or older.
That's it. You're right.
Or a lead sled in there. And like I know this one shop, they're building $1 million plus pro tour cars, winning big awards, has been standing mile stuff of 200 mile an hour and stuff. And they're like, man, we just wish we could build more street rods. You know,
exactly.
The builder's never happy. Whatever, you know, they got $1 million cars in there, and they're like, oh, we'd rather build this or build that. And but for themselves, they're they might have a Model A coupe in the back, or they want a 32, and you see that, unfortunately, the generations of the guys that have collected them, their kids aren't always into hot rods. You know, I was lucky. I grew up in a Tri-5s was what I grew up around my dad. And
well, Shaporis had a good term too. He said there's nothing like looking through the windshield with a pair of 17-year-old eyes.
Yeah.
That's what you think of when you're in there, you know.
I wish I still had 17-year-old. I'm going to the eye doctor next week. So
yeah.
So what would you like to? You talked about Jerry, your cars in your collection. Is there anything that you would like? Anything that I would like that in my garage? And you too think about that, Jason, or what you would like to build?
Oh no. What would you do, Jake? I did a 37 Woody. I wanted a wooden car. I did one of those. That was a learning curve. Yeah. This thing come out of Johannesburg, South Africa, right-hand drive. And it was shipped over there to Africa, of course. And the old chassis was pretty rusty. So I put a 40 chassis under it to keep it Jenny looking, you know. And it ended up going up to Idaho. I sold it up there. But my wife drove that car from Kansas City to Myrtle Beach. Manual steering, a Vega. Yeah. With no issues, never one complaint.
Woodies are a weird group of people. I had a 50 shoebox Woody. It was like almost like a rust-free body, except for the rockers. I think those in shoeboxes went bad the first 3 years. It needed all the wood. We needed a wood kit, and trying to sell that car either for a customer to let me build it, or sell to somebody that wanted it. The Woody people, they've either been there, done that, or they already got a Woody in their collection, or they learned that you have to take care of that car slightly different. And that's the only car that I've sold in like 20. I'm covering my wife's ears that I actually lost money on that car selling it to somebody. And yeah, Woody, I love Woody's, but I always wanted to do a
Right.
Woody. My grandpa was a woodworker. I always wanted to do a Woody with him, but I never got around.
Yeah, like driving a kitchen cabinet. It squeaks.
Oh man, that 37, it squeaked, it moaned,
It did.
they said, well, you never want to get him in the rain. That was really the only time it was quiet because the wood swelled up. It didn't make any noise
Yeah.
when it got wet.
It's still hard to beat a good Woody though. When you see them, man, they're. My wife's thinking dirty.
Oh, yeah,
she's
it is.
giggling. So
People couldn't understand it. I put a drop axle in it, of course, and split bones and a 302 Ford.
Yep.
Brand new 302 C4, of course.
Well, we were down, so we get that car. We got it from Alan Mason and Mason's Hot Rods down there, and we met him at Pigeon Forge.
Mm-hmm.
So he brings the car to us. All right, so the car rolls in and it's just in pieces. So we're putting it in our trailer, and sitting in the booth with my dad is Angelo. You just mentioned Angelo.
Mm-hmm.
He's just sitting just like this. I think probably the same chairs. We're sitting in these. He's sitting in these chairs, and of course Angelo said, "What are you gonna do with it, Jerry?" And my dad said, "Well, you better do it a hot rod." And the next question, what motor are you going to put in it?
Yeah.
And my dad's sitting there going,
I'm going to put a Ford in there.
I said, a Ford? Angelo said, good answer.
Right answer.
Yeah, it's like, oh man. Say, what do you say? I guess we're going to put a Ford in it.
No. So
Well,
Jason,
that's what we did. We put a Ford in.
When we run shops, it's hard to get time for our own stuff. Is there a car that you would like to build for yourself that you've never got to do?
Colton and I, because Colton's, we've been talking about it. Colton would, he'd really like to do.
What does Colton have for a car?
So, and that's what we're talking about. So Colton is, hadn't had an opportunity yet to really, to do anything. He did a Jeep and some things like that because he likes the 4-wheel drive stuff. Mm-hmm. But now that he's been more around it, he's, because he's been around it, but I've let him find his own path, in the types of cars and things that he likes. And, but now he's starting to loop back around, and especially when we, even before the Rock, but when we went to the Rock, man, it just pounded it home. He really wants to do a 32 two-door. And so I think that's probably something he and I are going to be doing. And he's got, like we all do, he's got it in his mind exactly what he wants to do. The grill, we had, I don't know if I told you, but we remember the two-door that we had upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes, he went up the other day and he's digging around up there. See because I told him we had some 32 parts up there. Oh man, here he goes. So he climbs up in the attic and he's digging around, and I think we got fenders, some front fenders, some rear fenders. He found the hood, brings the hood down. And so he brought that hood down. He's got it sitting on a couple of sawhorses. I go over there, man, and he's just all ate up. Mm-hmm. And so I think that'll be the next one. Something the three of us can work on together, and do a two-door, because he's got 2 kids. It's gonna work out good. And a two-door is just of course 32. You really can't mess a 32 up anyway. No matter what you do to it, either chop it or unchop it. It doesn't make any difference.
So good-looking lines. You don't even do it.
You might want to rethink this. If we never had kids, but sometimes kids can be annoying. So I'd want a 3-window with a rumble seat and put the damn kids in the back of the rumble seat so you don't have to listen.
Well, it's funny you say that, because the 5-window that we were talking about had a rumble seat in it,
but they grow up awful quick.
Yeah. So some of my earliest memories, we would go from Kansas City over to the Roaring 30s. What was the name of that college?
Lindenwood College.
Lindenwood College. The Roaring 30s did a run over there, and so I would ride in the rumble seat from Kansas City over to the college,
St. Louis
and
St. Charles.
Yeah, St. Charles. That's right. So
that's funny. Lindenwood. We used to have a cycling program. A kid that we sponsor BMX racing went there for 2 years to Lindenwood for the BMX program.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no kid. Yeah. So it would be on the campus there is where the show was. And I remember one year we come back and it started to rain, and I took the deck lid and pulled it down, and there was enough room in there for me where I just kind of pulled it down till it stopped raining, opened it back up, and popped my head back up. So
you were little
mentioned
then,
the rumble seat. What's that?
You were little then.
I was much littler then.
See,
where I could fit in
I
front of
didn't
a
hardly
rumble
fit in a rumble seat when I was little because my dad always told me to eat up because fat kids are harder to steal than we don't really fit in a trunk. So, yeah. Yeah. That's so. So anything else we need to touch on? We should probably wrap this up. We're a little over 2 hours in, so we've got a lot of stuff we've got a lot of info in this interview.
Good.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, and I think, this year especially, Dad and I talked about it, and Colton too, and our family talked about it. That this was an important year because we just wanted to share the history with as many people as we could. We went to shows and had done a couple of different interviews. Kevin, we did an interview with, and Dad did a podcast with Kevin for the HRIA.
Mm-hmm.
You had done that over the phone, just going over history.
Mm-hmm.
And but that was important to us this year, to be able to share the cars as much as we possibly could.
Yeah,
so
and
we
I see
just
that, like you say, everybody knows the cars, and it's part of their life, and everybody's got a story. And every time I'd get off the stage, I'd go at the Triple Crown and go to the food tent, or I'd go to the bathroom. So I'd walk right by your guys' booth, and there was always people around both of those cars telling stories, or asking questions, or is that really it? Yeah, it was really cool to see that. So, what shows are you guys going to be doing in the next year? Are you going to do the same amount? I kind of see you at more places because it was your 50th, maybe.
Right. Yeah, we'll probably do the same loop. We're going back to the 50s, the Nationals, the Triple Crown. We're gonna, of course, go down to the Rock just for fun. We'll be doing that again this year.
Are you doing the Roadster show again?
We're not going to be doing the Roadster show this year.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't remember if you always did that. This year it was perfect because you had your booth.
It was
set up in the Sloniker building right by the truck.
Exactly. That was all kind of looped around that. So.
Which, if people don't know the truck that we have mentioned, I'm blank. What's his name again? Sorry.
Bill Paul.
Bill Paul.
Yeah, and
for a long time to visit with him, and he built a truck that it says the California Hauler.
Basically. Yeah, California Kid Express.
Oh, okay, Kid Express.
Yep, and that's the one that Bobby and Karen Schumacher and their team at Vintage Fabrication were the ones that built the truck.
Yeah, we did the chassis and everything for it.
Yeah, we did the chassis.
It's the truck version of the California Kid, and it won Street Rod of the Year this year. And
it did. Good guys. It sure did.
Yeah. So it also had a good year, and I know he'd been working on that thing for a long time. So
yeah,
he ramped it up to get it done to kind of on your guys' 50th.
Yeah, it did. It hit just right on the 50th.
It sure did.
Awesome.
Yeah, neat truck.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very cool.
The metal work in that truck is incredible.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I don't think a lot of people pay attention to exactly what's going on that.
I know.
It started as a 34 Ford four-door.
Yeah. It was 33 Ford four-door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I did the interview at Columbus, emceeing the Street Rod of the Year program, and I made him say that again for everybody in the back. How what was cut on, and it's like, and then afterwards people come up, like, I kind of missed that. There's a lot of work to that thing, but
right.
As we talked about, street rods and stuff, I see traditional street rods are really big, and we almost did a TV show that I wanted to do a street rod show, and it was going to be called Street Rods Ain't Dead, because some of these muscle car guys say that street rods die. But yeah, I don't agree with them. So when last time we were at the shop was a year and a half ago when we stopped for Salina, you had more 48 and older chassis in there than anything. I mean, you had a lot of other stuff going on too.
Oh yeah,
it's really cool.
Yeah. It's the same way. Yeah, I mean, it's the Model A 32, 33, 34 are still,
the deuce fixtures are still full. All the time. All the time.
Yeah.
The C10, everybody's doing a C10 now. That's a hot truck.
Yeah. But yeah, for us, it's still the Model A's. We're doing which it surprises me. Well, maybe not. We're doing more 42 through 48 Ford chassis.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've done more this year than we have in the last 5 years. I got another phone call on one today on the 42 through 48.
That's one on my list. I want to build a modern version of the Fat Jack orange car. I want to do that.
Yeah, the Fat Attack. Yeah.
That's an iconic cover of Hot Rod.
Yeah.
Oh,
when they shot those two cars in the desert,
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah,
Right at dark. That was a great Baskerville.
yeah. I've in fact, I was with John down at the Rock. John and I got to spend some time.
John Robinson.
Yes, John Robinson,
Yep.
Jack's son.
We have him scheduled coming up in
Oh, good.
January. We're
Good.
going to get him on here. So
Oh, man, that's good.
he's a good storyteller. Yeah.
Yes, he is. Oh,
Him
man.
and Little John were close, very close.
Yeah.
I was at SEMA one year, and Little John had just had his falling out with Horetka, and it was Shazoom was the last car that they had built there.
Was it the White Willies?
No, there's stories on that too.
Oh, yeah.
But and Jack was standing there, so I stopped and talked to Jack and said hi to Little, and heard Little John. And Jack says, "Listen to this," because he knew he was going to do something. Because Horetka was over there wiping it off, and he says, "Hey, everybody, have you heard about Horetka's new car? It's called Chapter 13." You know, and that's the way John was. You know, he didn't care. He didn't care at all. But
Fat Jack didn't care either. Yeah.
no, that guy that bought that white Willis coupe, man, I can't believe he did what he did. That was an iconic car.
Yeah.
You know, blew it apart, painted it candy tangerine. Then he come to Little John and he says, "I want you to build me a set of wheels for it." He said, "I ain't gonna build you no wheels. Ain't no way." He said, "I didn't tell you what I was willing to pay." He says, "Okay, I'll listen to that." $10,000 a wheel is what he paid me to build a set of wheels for that Willis.
I was telling John about when you saw his dad roll in. What was it? It was down in Oklahoma. One of the
Oklahoma.
nationals.
Mhm.
What was it? Tulsa?
Yeah,
Did he come rolling in that car?
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Yeah, he'd bought Little John's gray 32, silver at that time. You remember that?
Mhm.
And he come out, he had a pair of shorts on, and he had blisters all underneath his leg.
Back of his legs.
Had blisters all. And AC went out in it in Arizona someplace. So he liked to burn up in that thing. And John builds 3-inch exhaust for everything.
Right against the floor.
And it's all bolted against the floor and the cross members.
It just cooked him all the way there.
Because that's where Little John started, was funny cars.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, I miss Little John a lot.
Yeah.
He was a good guy.
Yeah.
He really was.
Yeah.
I remember he got into the motorcycle deal, and a friend of ours down south was building these long, stretched out motorcycles and all that. And we was down there close to Little John's trailer, and that's when he had just started. Him and Boyd did the motorcycle business. And Kurt knew Little and knew all of that. He was close with the guy that had the bike. And he says, "Can you get Little John to come over and look at my bike?" And I thought, oh man, what a mistake. Because everything Little John touched had to be a hot rod.
Yeah.
So he come
All
over
very
there,
small, all very dainty. You know, it had its
had
has
to look and
place.
see why he did it and what he did. So he's standing there looking at it. And then, of course, he's all puffed up, the guy that owned it. And of course, he was talking to him. He said, "Well, what do you think?" And he says, "It's just what we need is another effing Freightliner." So that was Little John.
Little
You
John
know, he
car
never-
back here. Remember when he used to do those cars every year?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Got a car. I got a bunch of stuff that a buddy had, and then he passed away. I ended up with it. That was Mike Guidry's stuff out of Texas. So I have a lamp. You've probably heard the lamp stories that Little John did lamps in 1988.
Oh, yeah.
I got one of them in my living room.
Absolutely.
These two billet chairs back here were made by Little John for Mike Guidry. Hired him to build these like beach chairs, and they rock. I have two of these chairs.
I remember you telling me about them.
Yeah, I'm a nerd on that stuff. So.
That's cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I've had a couple buddies trying to buy them, and like my wife has a list. If I pass away before her, she's going to call this guy, and this guy who gets first shot at
It's
buying.
like an auction.
Yeah.
What you did.
Mark Warwick gets first chance at those chairs. So
I understand.
I got all the repair signs from Pete when it was Hot Rod Repair. That's the way they started.
Yep.
And we got those hanging around here in places.
Yeah. I whenever Tim came in, I made sure he saw all the different the different years of signs.
Well, and the one that they knocked down, it was behind the flame cutter. And he said, Jake says, I got something over here you may want.
Yeah.
And he said, this was knocked off the wall or off the building by our tractor trailer.
Yeah, because it hung sideways.
Yeah, it did.
You know, it had a bracket that came out and it hung sideways.
And it was
And
a
the
hot
trucks
rod
would
repair.
come by and hit it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got it back there. It's hanging up.
Yeah.
And cool memorabilia, just like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, if anybody's ever going through the Kansas City area, they need to stop by Pete and Jake's in Peculiar. And it's a great, they'll give you a tour. The memorabilia around there is incredible. Every year we say we're going to do it. And Jason, you've offered this, that if I get my truck done again for the lead sleds in Salina, the KKOA, we're going to try to put a little mini tour starting in Nashville.
Sure.
hey, that'd be great.
Go to
We'd
Wichita
love it.
and try to get 10 or 15 people to come by and see the
Good.
place. So
We'd love to have you.
yeah.
Be cool.
So any
Listen, you guys have
any last words before we wrap this up?
I don't think so. You know, we've
covered it.
yeah,
Just about.
the 50 years of history in about 2.5 hours. I guess we condensed it down. But
I can sit
but
there
you know,
for 3 days and listen
I know.
to Jerry
I
tell
know.
stories.
Well,
And I know as soon
yeah.
as you're going to go home tonight and tomorrow, he's like, oh, I forgot to tell this. And I forget. Because we can always do a part 2 sometime next summer. So,
Well, you know, and it's always one of those things, you know, this year we talked about it, you know, 50 years isn't possible without, you know, the all the employees we've had through the years, family, you know, and all of our customers. You know, without them, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. That phone wouldn't be ringing, and we wouldn't continue to do, you know, what we love to do every day.
yeah.
Man, we answer a lot of questions, Tim.
Yep.
Man, we do.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know that last time I was there, that phone never stopped ringing. Yeah.
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 So
But you know, we're
Yeah,
pretty
that
lucky
sounds
to be
great.
able to make our living in hot rods. Is the
I know
There
guys
you
at the
go.
Roadster Shop? They do a podcast,
We're all
and Jeremy's
blessed.
younger brother, he always says that. I know it's going to be like the Gong Show someday. They're going to ding the bell, and it's like, you know, this has been all made up. You know, you can't really build hot rods and do hot rod parts for a living, but we are.
Yeah. Yeah, we're blessed.
Yeah,
to be able to do what we do.
yeah.
We're just blessed.
Against my guidance counselor in high school, I proved him wrong for at least 30
That's
years
it.
so far. So
There you go. You're right.
So
That's
we
good.
want to thank the Slovers, Jerry and Jason, for being a guest on the Strange Motion Way podcast. It's been an
You're
honor.
welcome.
So we've been talking about having you guys on for a while. We had a couple miscommunications on it. I think your dad just said, I'm going home one night. And I'm pretty happy and honored you guys both took the time to be on our podcast. And honored to know you guys. And I wear
Yeah, it
my
was a great time.
shirt
Yeah.
proudly. So
Well, thank
Yeah.
you to you, Tim, and also Carrie for putting all this together for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
All right. Thank
Have a
you.
good evening, guys.
All right. Have a good evening.
Mhm.
thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
The Strange Motion Way podcast, brought to you by Royal Purple Synthetic Oils.
Royal Purple premium synthetic motor oils and high-performance chemicals have been designed to improve performance in all conditions and provide cleaner operation, better mileage, and decreased oil change frequency. That means less oil changes. With products available for your gasoline and diesel engines, Royal Purple is the obvious choice for your performance needs. Drive with Royal Purple, the synthetic expert.